everyone who is expected to be here tonight, which, as you said, is a small quorum, but we're good to go.
Okay. Welcome to the Amherst Planning Board meeting of August 17th, 2022. My name is Doug Marshall, and as the chair of the Amherst Planning Board, I'm calling this meeting to order at 6:34 p.m. This meeting is being recorded and is available live stream via Amherst Media. Minutes are being taken. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 and extended by Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022 and extended again by the state legislature on July 16th, 2022, this planning board meeting, including public hearings, will be conducted via remote means using the Zoom platform. The Zoom meeting link is available on the meeting agenda posted on the town website's calendar listing for this meeting, or go to the planning board webpage and click on the most recent agenda, which lists the Zoom link at the top of the page. No in-person attendance of the public is permitted. However, every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the meeting in real time via technological means. In the event we are unable to do so for reasons of economic hardship or despite best efforts, we will post an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the Town of Amherst website. Board members, I will take a roll call. When I call your name, unmute yourself, answer affirmatively, and return to mute. Bruce Coldham.
I'm here.
Tom Long is absent. Andrew McDougall is absent. I, Doug Marshall, am present. Janet McGowan.
Here.
Johanna Newman is absent. And Karen Winter. Karen? You're muted.
Here.
Good, thank you.
Sorry.
Board members, if technical issues arise, we may need to pause temporarily to fix the problem and then continue the meeting. If the discussion needs to pause, it will be noted in the minutes. Please use the raise hand function to ask a question or make a comment. I will see your raised hand and call on you to speak. After speaking, remember to remute yourself. The general public comment item is reserved for public comment regarding items that are not on tonight's agenda. Please be aware the board will not respond to comments during general public comment period. Public comment may also be heard at other times during the meeting when deemed appropriate. Please indicate you wish to make a comment by clicking the raise hand button when public comment is solicited. If you have joined the Zoom meeting using a telephone, please indicate you wish to make a comment by pressing *9 on your phone. When called on, please identify yourself by stating your full name and address and put yourself back into mute when finished speaking. Residents can express their views for up to 3 minutes or at the discretion of the planning board chair. If a speaker does not comply with these guidelines or exceeds their allotted time, their participation will be disconnected from the meeting. All right. So the first item on our agenda tonight is approval of minutes. And we have the August 3rd minutes, which was our last meeting. Board members, any comments on the minutes?
None from me, other than that I thought they were exceptionally thorough. I mean, compared to 20 years ago, it's rather stunning, actually.
Well, thank you, Bruce. You should know we've had a lot of conversation in the last year or two about the proper level of detail in minutes. So we are where we are, and Chris and Pam are doing a great job keeping up with us. Anybody have any other comments? Okay. So that being the case, does anybody want to move approval of the minutes as drafted? Bruce,
So
I
moved.
see your hand, and I'll recognize you as making the motion. I'll go ahead and second the motion. Any further comments from the board? All right, so we'll go through a roll call vote. Bruce,
Approve the minutes as presented.
thank you. We'll skip Tom and Andrew. Janet
Aye.
and Karen,
Aye.
and I'm an aye as well. Motion passes 4 in favor and no rejections. Okay, we'll move on to the second item, which is public comment period, the general public comment. As I stated a moment ago, this is for topics which are not on our agenda this evening. Are there any public comments? Any members of the public who would like to make a comment? I see that we have 5 members of the public in the attendees area. I don't see any hands raised for those from those folks. So going once, going twice, going 3 times. All right, so the time now is 6:40 and we will end the general public comment period. Bruce, I see your hand.
A question really, a protocol, perhaps to you, Doug or Chris. I've been a attendee of the school committee meeting for the past 2.5 years, and it's always frustrated me that I couldn't see who was attending. I'm wondering whether it's ever been suggested that the chair read the list of attendees so that people know. My sense of this is that if this was a regular public meeting, providing you weren't blind and you could cast your eye around the room, you'd know who was there. And I think this is a significant failing of Zoom, that the attendees don't know who's in the room. So I would always like for, not just for this board, but for any board, but particularly this board, because I'm now a member of it, that we might make a policy of before the public comment of reading who the attendees are. And if I don't know whether it's a motion, it's a suggestion, and and also a question, because there may be some protocol that I can't imagine, but maybe that would say that that was not appropriate.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Chris, do you have any comment on that? I guess I will say that sometimes the names that show up in the attendees list are not actually the person's name. It may be a spouse, or it may be some other shortened name that doesn't really give you a full sense of who they are. But at least this evening, it looks like we have 5 members who have a first name and a last name. Whether that corresponds to the actual people who are watching, I don't know. Chris?
I just wanted to make note of the fact that tonight we only have 5 attendees, but sometimes we could have as many as 50. So we might want to be judicious in when we read the names or not. So if we set a precedent, then we may end up having to, go through a list of 50 names on some nights when we have a very interesting topic.
Well, I have noticed that the attendees, it's not consistent through a meeting. Sometimes people come in late, and sometimes a lot of people leave early. So by the time we get to the later part of our agenda, it's gotten a lot smaller. Janet?
I'm going to agree with Bruce's suggestion, because people have commented to me, and I think to the board, that it's kind of alienating not to be able to see who else is there, or even how many people are there, if you're a member of the public, and have often asked to have those names listed. And I do think, if there's 50 people in the audience, like if you're just attending a meeting and you don't know, you can see the participants, but you can't see the public, and there's 50 other people, that would affect how I felt about the meeting in a way, or I'd like to know that. So I would go for just reading the names. I also know that I've attended like Zoom meetings where I could see, I wasn't a participant on the panel, but I could see the other people's names. And I wonder if that capability could be, we could go to that. So somebody who's interested could sort of, anybody in the audience can kind of go through the names and look around.
Okay. So I guess I'm wondering whether we ought to delay setting that precedent until we have a larger group. What do you think, Chris? Or does anybody, should I just go ahead and start that?
I think you could start it tonight and then say that this isn't setting a precedent and we're going to try it out. And if it becomes a problem in the future, that it won't continue.
Okay. All right. So the members of the public that I can see in the attendees list consist of Bruce Allen, Elizabeth Veerling, Maura Keene, Pam Rooney, and Sophia Holden. All right. I guess we can move on to the third item on the agenda. So this is Planning Board review and recommendations to ZBA. So this is, I believe, a presentation of a project that is coming to the ZBA, and we expressed some interest in hearing about in advance of the ZBA hearing. This is concerning ZBA FY 2023-02 with Michael and Tracy Holden. Request a special permit to modify the previously approved special permit ZBA FY 2007-43 to allow the construction of a one-family detached dwelling as a complementary principal use to the existing two-family detached dwelling or duplex under sections 3.01, 3.320, 3.3211, and 10.38 of the zoning bylaw located at 1147 North Pleasant Street on map 5C, parcel 35, located in the Village Center Residence or RVC zoning district. And welcome, I believe that's Michael that I see in the picture rather than Sophia. So welcome this evening and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And I will say it, Chris, you can do an intro in a moment, but I wanted to say at the outset, I think the main reason we asked you to come was we were interested in the way in which you are allowed to do this and wanted to understand the process under which you're proposing and how this, and how this is allowed in the zoning bylaw. So Chris, was there anything you wanted to say before we hear from Mike?
Yes, I wanted to say that I think that the reason this is being allowed to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals in this manner is because there's an existing special permit on this property. And the special permit is for a two-family house. Normally, if you had a single-family house on a property, you wouldn't be able to add another single-family house because there's no mechanism to do that in the zoning bylaw. But since this already has a special permit on it, the door is kind of open to having another special permit to do something else. So there is a section of the zoning bylaw that says, and I should have read this, I should have had this ready before, but it's section 3.01, I believe. And maybe Pam can find that so we can all read it together. And 3.01 talks about, here it is, the development or operation on a single lot of more than one dwelling or more than one of the principal uses described in section 3.3 is expressly prohibited except where the principal uses are clearly complementary to each other or were otherwise provided by this bylaw. So when the zoning board reviews this case, they will need to make a finding that these two uses, the use of the two-family house that already exists there and the use of the single-family house that's being added are complementary uses. So I just wanted to put that into context. And now you are being asked to make recommendations to the Zoning Board of Appeals about this project. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Mike, if you want to tell us about your project.
Sure, just quickly before Mike jumps in, I can share the screen with the ZBA application, so Mike, do you want me to do that just to start sharing the screen and you can direct me where to go, or?
Yeah, no, that would be great. I don't have the ability to do it on my end, so.
And it's probably not useful for people. Sorry for all the scrolling. Where do you want me to start, Mike?
I mean, basically, the project that I'm presenting to the ZBA is the idea that I purchased a property 14 years ago, about 14 years ago, and purchased it as a non-owner occupied home that was being used as variety uses. Prior to us purchasing it, it was a Sandra Godden's doctor's office on the first floor in the front, had an apartment in the back that was occupied, and a small apartment on the second floor that was occupied, not all of which wasn't technically on record with the town. It was listed as a single family house, but with commercial use for the doctor's office. But I don't think they had permitting, let's say, or been approved to have the 2 apartment units in it. So we purchased as a single family house, and I applied for the special permit to convert it to a 2-family dwelling, which it was more or less already had been being used as. But we went through the process of converting it to a 2-family. So we had the front approved for a 4-bedroom and the back approved for a 2-bedroom. And it was non-owner occupied for close to 14 years now. This past year, back in the fall, my family decided, I've got 3 children, ages 10 through 16, and we decided to move to Amherst. The front portion of the house was unoccupied come the end of last summer, and we decided to move into the front house. We've since enrolled all 3 of our kids in the Amherst school system. I've got my middle daughter entering freshman year of high school. My older daughter's entering her junior year. And then I've got my son entering 5th grade. We, as a family, have decided we want to stay in Amherst long term. The kids are all loving the school system. The issue with it is that the front part of the house is not conducive to a family of 5. Technically, it's listed as a 4-bedroom, but it's really a 3-bedroom with fairly large living room and dining space. But it has, we knew moving into it that this was sort of a temporary situation, that it wasn't conducive to our family of 5. So we considered various options and really decided, my kids love the location of the property. We've got the bus directly across the street. We're just a couple miles up the road from all 3 of their schools, and started inquiring about the possibility of putting a single family owner occupied dwelling unit on the property. We had gone in front of the ZBA about 13 years ago. At the time, we were considering trying to add additional apartment units to the property, and we did not proceed with that. It wasn't approved at the time. And so we just sort of left it as it's been for the last 13 years, as just a duplex on the front portion of the property. As you can see, there's it's a decent sized lot for the area. It's in North Village Center Residential in North Amherst. When we purchased it, it was technically, you can see sort of the remnants of a dotted line where it had been 2 lots, but we purchased as one because it wasn't a flag lot. It had no frontage. When we made it a 2-family, we merged the 2 lots together, but met all the requirements once we had it surveyed, that we have enough land to meet the coverage requirements for it. And it just seemed like a perfect opportunity for us to be able to live in a great location, conducive to my family of 5, where all 3 kids could go to school just a couple miles up the road, have the bus directly in front of our house. And after talking to the planning department, tried to find a way that it could be approved to allow us to do so, which was as a complementary use to the front duplex.
All right, great. And it looks like you probably did the drawings for the house yourself.
I did.
Looks like you had
I know we
fun.
have a couple architects present, so I hope
Uh-huh.
you don't criticize my work too much,
No,
but
no,
I
no, I'm
did
not- I'm
spend
not-
some time over the
no
past year
criticism.
working in SketchUp.
Yeah, that looks good.
Thanks.
So board members, any questions or comments for Mr. Holden? Janet? You are muted.
You don't have enough, do you, I don't have the frontage requirement in front of me, but it sounds like you don't have enough frontage to do a flag lot. Is that
No,
correct?
correct.
And that's, I think it's 100 feet, but I might be just making that up. And they are in, and so when you went in front of the ZBA for like more units, when you said you did not proceed, is that because you felt like you weren't gonna get the permit just from the way it was going, or? was-
Yeah, we withdrew our application without prejudice at the time, thinking we might go back in front of the ZBA. It had become apparent it wasn't going to get approved to add additional apartment units at the time. One of some of the feedback that we were given at the time was had we been applying to have it be owner occupied, that they probably would have been more open to it. This is again going back, I think, almost 13 years ago, before the new master plan was done for North Amherst.
Another question I had was just,
Yep.
and it could be for Chris as well as you, Michael, is what, given, I don't know, given the size of your lot, how many units in RN can you get? You know, just not, just if it was, a converted dwelling or whatever, just how many units, what would be the maximum units you can get for the size of your lot?
I believe I believe it would allow for up to 5 units.
But this is RVC, right?
Village Center Residential, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, in RVC then, let me revise my question, I'm sorry. So is it 5 units in RVC?
That's the, I don't have the bylaw in front of me, but I believe when we looked at it 13 years ago, we were told the area lot size would allow for up to 5 units.
Okay, thank you.
In some form. At the time, I think we were doing it, we applied as condos, because that was the bylaw at the time that would allow us to have the units that we were looking to do. In retrospect, should this move forward, I'm glad that did not get approved at the time, because 13 years ago, if you'd asked me then if I'd be living in Amherst, I would have guessed no. But now that I've got kids at school age, Amherst became much more desirable for us to move to. And my kids, the whole family's loving being in Amherst, and like I said, we want to stay in Amherst long term.
Well, I'm actually happy to hear that.
Yeah.
I just want to note, for the board, what I think is true is that the ZBA can put an owner occupancy requirement, but I think that at any point, this could be converted to condos, and so the buildings could be sold separately and things like that. I'm not sure it would keep the owner occupancy requirement on your one thing, but I know there's sort of ways to sort of move away or get more owners in, which could be positive or negative. That's it for my questions right now.
All right, thanks, Janet. Bruce, I saw your hand.
Yes. Hello, Michael. I found out that I know Michael because when I checked the Mike Holden phone number on the application, that was the one I was familiar with. So I don't think disclosure is necessary, but just for the information of the board, Michael has worked for years for projects for Coldham and Hartman, and in fact has done 2 house projects for me personally. So we have a business relationship, but that's as far as it goes. And Mike, I was really pleased to at the prospect that you're moving into town as Janet, I think it's nice, but being in North Amherst myself, and you're just near the farm, and I'm always interested in capable people who move close to North Amherst Community Farm, so you can expect to hear from me on that, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't tell you that we were neighbors now.
No. A couple of questions. This would be a non-conforming lot, I would imagine, having a frontage of 90 feet in a RVC requiring 120.
Correct.
So is all of what we're talking about, and this is perhaps not a question for you as much as for Chris, is all of what is being proposed affected, compromised, or let's just say affected in any way by this being a non-conforming lot?
Chris?
You are allowed to change things on a non-conforming lot. I don't see that that's a problem. It's been done many times in the past. So the ZBA will recognize that this is a non-conforming lot when they grant if they grant their permit.
Yeah.
It's allowed under section 9.22 of the zoning bylaw.
Second is, I was surprised that one could keep building lots or houses on a lot that was already developed, and along with other members, I think, of the board, was interested in the part of the bylaw that made this possible. I looked in the application, and I noted that the application doesn't cite, Chris, that 3.01. I think it's generally useful to cite the section of the bylaw that you are asking for permission under. I had thought that's just a habit I got into. So I was perplexed because I didn't know what section of the bylaw was being leveraged here. You've told us that.
Bruce, I do see that referenced on the application.
Really?
Yeah.
I looked for it and I couldn't find it. Well, I stand corrected. Thank you, Doug. I did. I also, in looking, because it seemed that the phrase second principal use, and I scanned I searched the bylaw for mentions of the words phrase second principal use, and I could only find one, I think. So I was confused by that as well, because I couldn't see anywhere in the bylaw where second principal use was referred to in relation to residential properties of this nature. Possibly I wasn't very successful at that particular search either. So I wanted to be enlightened as to why and where the second principal use was the trigger for, or the basis for, making this arrangement acceptable.
Okay, Chris, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, the principal uses are the uses that are listed in section 3. It's the use category table. What is that called? I think it's just section 3. So it includes all kinds of things. It includes apartments, it includes townhouses, it includes single family houses, it includes 2-family houses, it includes retail stores. So all of those things that are listed in section 3 in the category, in the use category table, those are considered principal uses. So a 2-family house, if it's owner occupied or non-owner occupied, would be considered one principal use. A single family house would be considered one principal use. So in this case, Michael's going to be asking the Zoning Board of Appeals to make a finding that these 2 principal uses that are proposed to be allowed on this site are complementary to one another. And he'll have to make that argument to the zoning board. But we do have another case of a single family house, and I think it's at the corner of where Halleck meets North Prospect Street. There's a property there that had a single family house. And the zoning board of appeals granted a special permit in that case to add a duplex to that property. So again, the gateway to that was the fact that a special permit was required to put a duplex in. In
I
this
see.
case, the special permit has allowed the duplex to be there. So now the door is open to another special permit to allow the single family to be there. But of course, these are all discretionary permits and the ZBA can grant this or not grant it.
Okay, that's interesting to Karen and myself, I guess, because we didn't realize at the time, but that was the Pease Place duplex that came before us at the local historic district commission. And we were asked to make findings of a different nature, but I hadn't realized there was a parallel between this project and one that Karen and I at least are already quite familiar with. Final question, I think, and this has to do with something that we may, well, we'll see. Michael, the existing house at the front is a duplex. Is that correct? I think it is. And I know it's because you've told us that it's compliant so far as land use is concerned. The zoning board has approved that it be a duplex. Do you know whether the separation walls that this is code compliant, or is it grandfathered in some way?
No, when we did the renovation on the house, when we purchased it to convert it through the ZBA to a 2-family, we were required to put a continuous firewall down the middle of it from roof deck all the way to basement slab.
Okay, that's great, because
so at the time, so we had everything inspected through the building department to make sure that it met the requirements to have to convert it to the duplex.
Okay, I was going to suggest, if that wasn't the case, that we might recommend to the zoning board that they make that a condition of approval, but clearly unnecessary. My final comment is that I too would like to see, as much as possible, the maintenance of owner occupancy on this site, that one of the buildings is owner occupied. And I guess, I mean, we're quite concerned with neighborhoods and so forth, as many people are in town, becoming student occupied properties with landlords that don't care very much and allow things to go south. You're clearly, and I can see by the plan that you've got, that back house is so completely designed for a family that it seems that the floor plan itself is probably driving owner occupancy for the longest time. But I think properties that get densified in this way in the village centers and so forth, it would be very comforting to the neighborhood to know that that this expansion of accommodations on this site was tied to the perpetual owner occupancy.
All right, thank you, Bruce. And while you were saying you were familiar with Mike, I was sort of realizing that I think Mike did some work for me at one point.
I did, Doug. Good to see you. Good to see you again.
I'm not sure you had the beard at the time.
I've had a beard since I got married 18 years ago. That was the
Okay,
last
so
time
you
I
had the
shaved,
beard,
so
and I just
I
haven't
did,
thought
yeah.
about you since you finished your work.
Yeah,
So welcome to town.
thank you.
I think you lived north of Greenfield when we were.
Yeah, we moved from Berniston up
Yeah,
in the woods.
All right. Let's see, Janet, you had your hand up for a while. Is that passed, or you are muted, Janet?
No, I don't have a comment.
Okay. All right. So the only comment, actually, go ahead, Chris.
I just wanted to note, Janet asked a question about whether there was enough lot area. I think it was Janet. And I added up the lot area requirements, and there's 15,000 for the first unit and 4,000 for each additional unit. So the total required is 23,000, and that's reflected in this little zoning table that's on the plan here. So I just verified that, and they have over 30,000 square feet on the property existing. So I just thought I wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay. Janet?
Now I have a question. So I'm wondering, Michael, like who your tenants are in the front? Have they been students? Are they older folk? And then just if you have any observations on how many cars they have, because it's kind of an endless inquiry we have about how many cars people need. Do students need one car per person and things like that? I just wondered what your experience has been.
So to answer the first part of your question, primarily our tenants have been students. When we first renovated the house, I had a young woman with 2 children who had I think just finished at UMass, who lived in our back apartment for, I think, close to 5 or 6 years. Was a fantastic tenant. And then she bought a house in town and currently still lives in town. The front part of our house, because it was multiple bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, we've always had 4 students living in it. We had several years where they were grad students and a few years where they were undergrads. But I will say that we've always been very thorough with our process of selecting tenants and have never had any problems. I actually looked at town records, or looked at the complaint records, and was surprised that I actually had 1 noise complaint several years ago that I was not made aware of. But I think in the entire time we've owned the house, that was the only complaint that was ever filed against our house. And like I said, I was completely unaware of it, because if I had been, it would have been addressed. But we didn't get any more after that. But it's been primarily students, but I've always made it very clear to any incoming tenants that there are still single family, there's single family homes behind our property. But we do have a family across the street and to the north of us. The Valerios occupy that home. So I've always made it very clear to them that this was not going to be a student party house. Beyond that, I think when we got approved for the special permit to convert it to a duplex, we were told to allow 6 parking places. I believe basically 1 per bedroom for the house. Or we were allowed to provide 6 parking places, 1 per bedroom. You can see on my map, I've actually, because I don't think I've ever had 6 cars at the house at any given time. Currently, I have 2 students living in, well, actually, they're both graduates now, living in the back. And there's 1 car there part-time for them. And then my family's currently living in the front house, and we've got 2 vehicles. Although my oldest daughter's getting her license, so I expect a 3rd vehicle sometime soon. But I don't think there's ever been more than 4 or 5 vehicles on the property at any time.
Okay, thank you.
And parking's never been an issue. We've always been able to contain our vehicles to our parking spots. Unlike some of the nearby homes on North Pleasant Street, directly to the south of us, I mean, the neighborhood has changed quite a bit in the past 14 years since I've owned the home. When we bought it, there was an elderly couple that lived directly south of us. And the 2 houses south of that were owner occupied. Now, all 3 of those are currently rental units. And parking does continue to be an issue at those residences. But I will say that it's never been an issue at ours because we have adequate parking in back of the house.
Okay.
Okay. And Mike, I can't resist one comment I might make about the house.
Yep.
And that is that the way it's configured now, the front door faces the side
Yep.
of the lot. You know, it kind of looks like a house that was designed to face the street and has been turned and, you know, made to fit on the lot. And if there were any way to have the front door sort of face the driveway, you know, that might be more appropriate for this situation. But you know, that's just a comment, and I'm not, you know, I don't think it needs to be any part of any recommendation to the ZBA.
Okay. I will comment that because it was going to be single family owner occupied. We put the garage for obvious reasons on the west side of the house.
Yep.
Both to make ease of access to the garage easier, and also as a slight buffer from the street. to the house.
Yep.
And as far as the entrance to the house, I realize it's basically facing the backyard of the house south of us, which isn't necessarily ideal. There is a row of trees there, and I do plan on adding more screening along that.
Mhm.
I don't know that reconfigure because it's a long lot, and I've always sort of had this idea for what the first floor configuration of my house would be when we built it. I built my house up in Berniston, 16 years ago, but I always had an idea of what that first floor layout would be, and it fits lot size wise. Yeah, I get that it looks like it's facing the wrong direction, but I think I wanted basically the bulk of the windows on that side of the house, what you would consider the front side of the house, to be south facing, and I also wanted the roof to be configured for photovoltaic.
Uh-huh.
But it obviously makes sense because it's a long, narrower lot to position it that way as well.
Yep. Okay. All right. I'm not seeing any more comments. Chris, see your hand.
So I understand that you have the recommendation that the property remain owner occupied. Were there other recommendations that you had for the zoning board?
I wanted to ask about the owner occupied condition. And I guess, Mike, does that concern you that if whenever this property is sold, that you might have a pretty small pool of buyers who are limited to being owner occupied, but have to buy a 2-family duplex at the same time?
I mean, it does obviously any restrictions or limitations put on it are not desirable. Obviously, down the road, who knows what's going to happen 15, 20 years from now. Should we decide to sell the property? Obviously, it limits the number of potential buyers for it. Is there a market for a decent size single family dwelling unit with the benefit of the income of a duplex on the property? There is, but it's certainly going to limit buyers. I think, as Bruce mentioned earlier, the house was clearly designed to be a single family, probably owner occupied home. If I was looking to put an investment property that was going to be a rental on the property, I certainly wouldn't have designed the living space the way I did on the first floor. So it's a concern. I obviously would like to not have restrictions placed on it, not knowing what's going to happen down the road. But we have full intentions of staying in Amherst for a decent amount of, I've got, like I said, my son's entering 5th grade. So I've got at least 8 years in the public school system in Amherst. And then I'll have 3 kids going through college and probably returning home. So I'm looking at, potential 12 to 15 year plan. What's going to happen 15 to 20 years from now, I couldn't even begin to tell you. Because like I said, if you'd asked me 15 years ago if I was going to be living in Amherst, I probably would have said no. But we're glad to be here. So I'm okay with them with putting that restriction on it, because it's certainly have no intention of doing otherwise right now. I would assume that if 15 years from now we decided to downsize and possibly look to sell the property, that I could come before the zoning board again and ask that restriction be removed. I'm going to guess that the climate of the neighborhood, as I've said, it's changed dramatically in the last 15 years. I would expect that it'll probably change more over the next 15 years. So I would think that I'd have the ability at least to go before the ZBA again, if we found the need to have that removed.
Okay, great. Janet?
I think it's important that the conditions stay on the house. And I don't, like an owner occupied multifamily house is like the hottest thing in the Boston area, because it's a great way to get probably a bigger house than you expect. You have great tax benefits, and you have income units. And so it makes buying a house much more affordable. So I think that market isn't as strong here, but I think in 10 or 15 years, hopefully that will grow and that won't be seen as a bad thing, but actually be seen as a positive. But, listening to Michael talk about the neighborhood changing, I think that it's really important that we stabilize and strengthen neighborhoods and not turn into sort of like, houses with single family houses and families. We don't turn into a rental neighborhood for UMass students. And so I think that I hope that we as a board, and I personally really think that we need to stabilize neighborhoods and have a mix of housing types and not have a majority of students in a neighborhood, because that will turn a neighborhood. And so I think I see the Holdens as doing a great thing and, strengthening this neighborhood, keeping it stable, income property, their family is there. And I do think I would really encourage to keep this idea. And I think it will get more popular in Amherst. I've done it myself, and it's a great way to finance something you can't really afford and have your tenants basically pay for your mortgage or most of it. So I just think this is really an important issue for
All right.
Amherst.
Nate,
Sure, thanks. I guess the question, I'm wondering is the occupancy permit or requirement on the single family home or just on the property? So typically we would have an owner occupancy requirement on the property. So right, maybe the owner is in the front house, right, and not, or front unit and not in the single family because they might want to rent that. But Janet, when you said you said occupancy of the single family home, and that's what they're saying in their special permit, but is the recommendation that, or just that one of the units on the property be owner occupied?
Actually, that's a great point, Nate. I would say on the property, because the Holdens, as they get older, might want to move into the smaller units instead of having that big house. I know that problem too.
all right. Bruce?
I agree with Janet. I think for clarity that yes, the owner occupancy on the units, and Michael's a builder, and he's got great capabilities of doing exactly what Janet suggests. And I can tell you, for the last 7 years, Michael, since I've retired, I'm now doing what you've been doing all your life. I've spent 7 years making 2 houses for my kids. So in your 70s, you're still going to be able to do pretty much whatever you want. So I can see it's very possible that you would play with that property, and it could be very different and much, much better because of who you are. So I'm welcome to town.
Thank you.
All right, so it sounds like we would recommend a condition of owner occupancy on the property and not directly tied to the new single-family home. And I don't see any more hands. I haven't heard any other sort of conditions we might recommend. And I also don't see, wanted to know if there were any members of the public that wanted to make a comment on this. I would remind them that this will be coming before the zoning board, and you can make comments at that time as well. And those comments are likely to be more pertinent to their decisions. We're just doing a recommendation. So I don't see any hands from the attendees. So in that case, I think we can consider this topic closed. Chris, I now see your hand.
Oh, I just wanted to know if you would recommend that this application be approved and that this condition be added. Do you want to
Okay.
go that far to say that
Okay.
you think the application should be approved?
All right. So Janet, what would you agree with that?
I wouldn't recommend approval because I think that I'd leave it to the ZBA to decide about complementary uses. And then 9.22 is, as you know, I find it very disturbing provision and kind of unclear. So I don't feel like I'm in a position to say, yeah, go ahead. But I do think it's an attractive project. It's a really beautiful building. It's going to help the neighborhood. And, I see lots of benefits to it, but I defer to the ZBA.
All right, Bruce?
Again, Janet says what I was thinking. With a small a, I definitely approve of this from the point of view that I see as the purview of the planning board and so forth. And I did look at the master plan so far as this was concerned, and it seems to be consistent with what did I write here, section 4.8, the residential and densification of neighborhoods and doing densification this way. So from our point of view, if I can be so bold as to propose for the board, or the sort of things that I imagine the board would be supporting, I think this is very supportable. But I understand that the zoning board is asked to look at things slightly differently. That's why they're them and we're us. So again, like Janet, I wouldn't say recommend approval because I think that's their business. But I would say that I would be happy for Chris to represent a positive reception certainly from me
Okay,
on this project.
all right, thank you. Karen, do you want to make a comment on this? Would you in favor of recommending approval or just leaving it to the board?
I agree. I think this is a positive thing happening in North Amherst. And I would not, Janet and Bruce said exactly what I feel.
Okay,
I'm for it, but leave it to the zoning board.
all right. And I won't object to that, taking that position. So I guess it's if they approve it, we recommend an owner occupancy provision on the property. Bruce, is your hand a legacy hand or do you want to speak again? Okay. All right. So thank you, Mike. Appreciate your coming in. This was on an additional board conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
All right. All right, so the time now is 7:25. And we will move on to item 4, which is a site plan review of a SPR 2020-03 with Jonathan Gerfine for Riverside Organics at 555 Belchertown Road. A review of certain changes to the site plan under condition number 7 of the site plan review, including placement of concrete blocks in the driveway and parking lot for a marijuana product manufacturer and marijuana micro business under section 3.363.5 of the zoning bylaw, map 18D, parcel 2 in the PRP zoning district. Chris, why don't you start us off?
Yes, I noticed that Mr. Gerfine isn't here tonight. I was hoping he would be. I invited him to come. But in any event, the issue is that Mr. Gerfine had his property approved by the planning board back a couple of years ago to house a micro business growing marijuana. And he wasn't going to do any retail sales on the property. He was going to transfer the marijuana to another entity that would then sell it off-site. And so he got approval for his site plan, which you have received in your packet, and maybe we could show that site plan. But then it turned out that he added a few things. He did talk to the planning board back in, I think it was 2019, when this came before the planning board. He talked to the planning board about placing concrete blocks in the driveway. He talked about placing 2 concrete blocks in the driveway. And I think the reason for those was to keep people from being able to enter and exit the property quickly. He didn't want to, thank you, this is a good plan. He didn't want to have people be able to come in and out very quickly. So he placed these 2 concrete blocks in the driveway. They're about 16 feet 9 inches apart. They're not shown on the plan, but he did talk to the planning board about it. And it's on page 1 of his planning board decision. So then a resident drove by on Hall Drive, I think it was, on her way to the Valley Medical Center and noticed the 2 blocks in the driveway and felt that those were potentially dangerous and suggested that we might want to require that Mr. Gerfine put some kind of reflectors on the blocks to let people know that they were there, to make them more obvious. And so that complaint, if you will, came into the inspection services department. And so Rob Morris sent one of the inspectors out, and the inspector noticed that in addition to the concrete blocks in the driveway, there were also concrete blocks placed closer to the building, the new building. And 6 of them were placed along the driveway, and 4 of them were placed close to the building. I think, Pam, do you have access to that drawing that I sent out yesterday that shows, yeah, that's it. Okay, so this shows Porter Drive and Hall Drive. This isn't really called Porter Drive anymore. It's all called Hall Drive. There's a crosswalk there so people can cross over and walk to Valley Medical from Route 9. Route 9 is at the top of the page. And then a little ways in from the crosswalk are these 2 blocks that Mr. Gerfine had talked to the planning board about. They're about 2 feet wide and 3 feet long and 2 feet high. So they're a little bit smaller than the average Jersey barrier, and they're also more compact. So then this drawing also shows that there are 6 blocks placed along, of similar size, placed along the driveway that is within the fenced in area around the building. And I guess I should describe for Bruce and Karen, and I think Janet was on this planning board when this was approved, and maybe Janet wasn't on, and maybe Doug wasn't on. So
I don't remember hearing about this property before.
okay, well, so he had an existing building there that was an old radio station. And some of you who have lived in Amherst for a long time will remember that radio station. So that's the building that's shown to the right. And he's refurbished that building and painted it. And then he's added a greenhouse to the left. And the greenhouse is going to be, state of the art, temperature controlled, everything controlled about it, including microbes that aren't allowed into it, etc. It's taken him a long time, obviously, from the time he got this thing approved, which was sometime in the winter of 2020, to now. He's had difficulties with the state getting his approval. So in any event, this is still under construction. So he's placed these 6 blocks along the driveway, and he's placed 4 blocks against the wall of the greenhouse. And what he told me was that he placed the blocks inside the fence along the driveway and next to the greenhouse to protect those, to protect the greenhouse. He doesn't want people who come in here, namely, probably delivery people, to bump into things. But the problem is that the 4 blocks along the greenhouse actually are in the place of where the dumpster should be. And he doesn't have a dumpster there yet. So I guess if I were to recommend something to you, I would recommend that you go ahead and approve the 2 blocks in the driveway, because he did talk to you about those, even though they weren't on the plan originally, and that you could suggest to him or require that he put some kind of reflectors on them to make them more visible to people who might come into the driveway. But that once construction is finished on the building, that he remove the blocks that are within the fenced area, because those are, really not something that he talked to you about, and they weren't something that he showed on the plan. Let's see if I have anything else to say about that. So I have been in touch with him a few times, and I offered to go out and do the measurements and make this drawing, so it would make it easier for him to explain what he was doing here. Unfortunately, he didn't come tonight, but the essential idea is, can you approve these 2 blocks as well, the 2 blocks were a part of the decision. They were written into the decision. Can you, so I guess the question is, what do you want to do here? That's
All right, what do we want to do? Janet?
So I think I'm the only person on the planning board that was here during this, as I remember, like many hearings about this project. And so, Chris, it sounds like it's not operational yet. That's what you're saying?
not operational yet. Nope.
Okay. And so I went out and looked at this here, and I'm sorry I didn't take a photograph, because I thought that the 2 blocks were at the entry fence. Are there 2 blocks by the entry fence? Because that's what I
No.
see. Because so just, full disclosure, I have several times driven down this Porter Way, kind of messing up going to Valley Medical. And so I don't see that as a driveway. I see that as a road. And then when I looked on the map and the pictures, it is a road. And so I realized when I read your report, I was like, oh, that's his driveway. And then I got out there and I said, this is a road, this isn't his driveway. And so I do find them a strange place. It seems like he's put 2 blocks on a road that people could easily and accidentally go towards. I'm not even quite sure why they're there in a way, because, it seems to me that he could put blocks in front of the actual entryway to his thing. So I thought they were strange. I thought they were in the middle of a road and it's not his driveway. So that's kind of an issue to me, is like, is this a road or is this his driveway? The other question I had was like, does the town clear that road? Does, Porter Drive? And could the fire trucks, if 2 or 3 two or three trucks came in, could they maneuver around? Because one of the things we learned about growing marijuana in a greenhouse is there's a lot of carbon dioxide, there's a lot of energy being used. And so, the idea of having a fire was one of the considerations, as is in every situation, but there's a lot of electricity going into that unit, or will be someday. So my questions were basically, is that a driveway or is that a road or a private road? And then if he could just maybe, if he wants to use those blocks to stop people from quickly gaining access to his property, it makes sense to put it near the entryway, the entry fence, probably achieving the same thing. And hopefully, and then the question is he blocking the road for street clearing or fire trucks or whatever? So it just seemed when I went out there and looked, I wish I had taken a picture, because I sort of mentally remember.
I can bring up the pictures that Chris sent us.
Did we?
They're in the
Want-
packet. Yep.
Yeah, or you sent them in the email yesterday.
Oh,
Chris.
that's right. They're in the email that I sent yesterday. Yep.
Should I do that?
The memory is a strange thing.
All right, so here's photo 1. I don't know if you can see.
Can't see it. Oh, there. Yep.
Let's
So
see
that
if
shows the blocks within the fence.
Yeah, so that's photo 1. And then I'll stop share and share photo 2. Here we go, and view. There we go. There's the blocks. I mean, does this pavement joint, does that suggest that's the end of the public way?
No, so
It's not a
sorry,
public way. Porter Drive is not a public way. Neither is Hall Drive. The town may accept Hall Drive as a public way at some point because it leads to Valley Medical. I don't think the town has an intention of accepting Porter Drive. It's just a paper street, really.
Okay,
So that's what this is, Porter
all
Drive.
right. So it probably does not get plowed by the town.
I don't think so.
And would the fire department have any opinion about these blocks or not?
They may.
I just want to say that the blocks are put on the property line. So, essentially they're, 555 Old Belchertown Road owns the rest of the pavement where the red car is and with everything behind these blocks. And so Chris is right that it was paved originally as a turnaround to access the radio station. And perhaps if Porter Drive was ever developed into a subdivision, but that didn't happen. And so, it's just a relic of, when it was first developed. So the blocks are on the property line, marking what is Jonathan's property. So, they're more than wide enough for an emergency vehicle. I talked to the building commissioner. So
Okay,
delivery trucks can still make it through. It's really, I think, supposed to be a visual cue that it's not a road or something, right? So, whether or not, like Chris said, striping or another sign or something could indicate that, but I think that's the intention of it, not to prevent vehicular traffic, because on the site plan where the car is, there's supposed to be 3 parking spaces beyond, next to the, 3, including that red car, 2 more parking spaces on the pavement. So what's the remaining pavement on the site would be used for parking, and there's plenty of room for vehicles to go back and forth between those blocks.
Yeah, it looks like there's more than 20 feet.
Mhm.
There's 16 feet 9 inches between the blocks. I measured it.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so I think the question for the planning board is whether these changes are de minimis to the site plan, and can they be administratively approved, or is it, a significant enough change that the site plan needs to be amended?
Which
Right,
would
so-
involve a public hearing.
Right.
Well, I mean, I guess, Karen, you've got your hand up. I'll let you go next.
I actually drove there because this seemed so strange and it was so hard to understand reading this. And I was shocked at these dangerous looking, ugly looking, like East Berlin border things in the middle of the road. And I do see the point of whoever said, there they are at the moment, and somebody at night could really damage their car, and they're far enough apart so that they don't hinder any kind of traffic going through there. So for the public, it's just this weird thing, these 2 ugly things dropped in front of this building, but I wasn't part of what you approved before, and it's interesting that his reason for that is just somehow make it clear that this is not public, and people shouldn't be racing around. But there's a fence around the building to protect the building. It looks like it's extremely unaesthetic. Yeah, that's just my outsider opinion of this. I can see the public wondering what we're approving here.
Okay, Bruce.
I agree with Karen, but I also recognize that the decision says that that the private road which leads to the property will be partially barricaded with cement blocks at the entrance to his property. So whilst it's not on the plan, it was pretty specifically stated and therefore approved. So it seems to me that this is certainly at most a de minimis change, if not simply an inconsistency in the documents, because we deal with, for example, specifications and drawings where something is said in one document but isn't repeated in the other, and you say, well, the document that makes the case is good for all. So I would say that this is clearly a de minimis change, if even that.
Okay.
But at the same time, I think it's ugly and seemingly pointless. And but am I not right that this is water under a bridge?
Well, I mean, I guess the blocks at the entry seem, like you said, they were mentioned in the conversation when the applicant got his permit. So, I think Chris is more concerned, maybe if I can put words in your mouth, about the blocks that are inside that are in the way of where the dumpster was to be located, which kind of begs the question of where does he plan to put it if he leaves those blocks in place?
Well, that part,
I feel like it's de minimis or less.
for the blocks on the road, but I agree that the blocks, the other 10 blocks, I guess 6 and 4, are not de minimis. They weren't mentioned and they weren't on the plan, and they're taking the place of something that should be. So that seems to be clear that would require a reconsideration.
Okay.
But
All
the,
right.
the ones on the road, I would like to imagine that even though it's, whether we can have another bite of the cherry and at least do something to make them, you paint them or put some markers on them, or even take some of the blocks. I mean, I think it would look better if he put 2 or 3 of those blocks along there, so that it didn't look like somebody just dumped something there pointlessly. I mean, if you had 3 blocks instead of 1 either side, even, and then you could put a sign on that said private property or something, that would be more intelligent. It would be more, I mean, it would be better. Can we make that suggestion?
We can certainly suggest pretty much anything.
Okay, I get.
Okay, so Janet.
So, I think we had like 4 or 5 hearings with Mr. Griffin that just, it was kind of a, let me say kindly, an unorganized application. And it was also the first time we had seen anything like this. And so I don't really feel like the planning board okayed 2 cement blocks sitting in the middle of the road. And so it wasn't on the site plan. I don't think of this as the driveway. And so I think that, he mentioned this in the beginning, and I don't think we were focusing on, this is where on the private way his property begins, and this is where the cement blocks are. So I don't want to go back into all those hearings, but I don't think this is something that we would agree with if we had seen it then, and we don't really agree with it now. And I understand that Mr. Griffin is trying not to call attention to his facility, and is very concerned about security. And so I could see why he doesn't want a lot of people driving up, perhaps a person like me, thinking I'm going to Valley Medical and I'm not. So I wonder if there's a better way for him to mark this as private property, and a way that's safer, because to me, this looks really unsafe. It's just, they're low, they're gray. At night, they're not going to be very visible. I could see easily someone driving into it. So I'm not sure the board said, yeah, 2 cement blocks in the middle of the private way, that's where your property starts, and so I think that maybe, the landscape architects would have picked that up if they had seen it. But I'm not crazy about, it's not just an aesthetic thing. I think they're dangerous, and I think they're not really achieving what he wants, which is to delineate this as private property and people aren't really invited.
All right, Karen.
I know he said somewhere in his application that he was going to, I think it was with the fence and the gate, that he was amenable to making it as aesthetically pleasing as possible. And I think also the board said that grass has to be mowed and it has to have neat appearance. So I think one should just bring up the fact that this is about as ugly as it gets. And is he open to, does he have any ideas? Can he put planters around them and accomplish the same thing? And, just so we don't have this bomb shelter effect at that part, is my recommendation.
All right, thank you, Karen. So Chris, it sounds like the majority of the board would like to have Mr. Whatever his Griffin return, and we may or may not consider the 2 blocks on the entry to be de minimis, but we would like to have a conversation about the blocks inside as not being de minimis. And while we're talking with him, we're going to want to talk about the 2 blocks that are at the entry and discuss alternative ways for him to mark his boundary in a way that's more pleasing.
Thank you.
Nate, I see you've
Yeah,
taken.
I just shared my
the
screen. This is the 2021 aerial photograph, and so there's a crosswalk now, and so here's Route 9, here's Hall Drive, and it takes almost a 90-degree turn up to the medical center, and here's the greenhouse being built, and here's the blocks are essentially right here. So if we're talking about how to change how the road feels, I mean, I feel like just the nature of how the road itself turns, it's hard to change that. If Porter Drive was never going to be developed, I don't think they would have done this type of corner here, right? So they're leading you into straight, and then you're taking such a turn. And so, unless we're asking the applicant to change, cut out pavement and, remove curbing, or like, Corinne said, planters or something else, which isn't immediately at the property boundary, right? So there's some area behind the crosswalk that's still not on the property. I mean, I feel like I'd like to know if there's suggestions to the applicant in terms of how to do that. So if, we'd be asking then for an amended site plan, and we'd want to have as much information as possible up front. So what could we recommend or suggest to the applicant to do that? That's all.
All right, Bruce.
In response to what you said, Nate, recommendations, it occurs to me that he's got 10 additional blocks that he has got to do something with. And I would say that expressing the concerns that have been expressed, and I'm particularly swayed by what Janet says, because she was there and I wasn't. So that and I did a marijuana facility years ago in Connecticut, and I understand how discombobulated those people are. I mean, they're just hopeless. So if it was anything like I had to deal with, I can well understand what you said, how you must have felt, Janet. But apropos of what you say, Nate, I would simply say, on the basis of what we've got at the moment, and since he chose not to come, so we don't have much to work with. But what we do have is 10 additional blocks and a problem at the entry, which is currently is inappropriately resolved with a couple of silly blocks. So I would say, think about how you can use those other 10 blocks and some plants perhaps, or colors, or signage, or reflectors, or whatever imaginative thing that can be done with those 10 plus 2 blocks to solve the problem that he has with that strange entry there.
All right, Chris, I think yours was the next hand that popped up.
Well, I wanted to say thank you to Bruce for mentioning how discombobulated some of these applicants can be. And this particular applicant is particularly discombobulated. So I just wanted to say that, because I will transmit the information that you have told me and suggested. I'm just not entirely sure that we're going to get a satisfactory resolution. So if we don't get a satisfactory resolution, I think that what's going to happen is that the inspection services department is going to require him just to remove all the blocks. Anyway, I just wanted to state that.
Yep.
All right. Janet?
So I was going to say that I thought Mr. Griffine was, very open to suggestions and flexible. So I think he would probably prefer to make adjustments without the formal opening of the hearing. And that maybe, the suggestion is to put more cement blocks there and paint them a color that would be easily seen by motorists day or night, because they kind of match the street. So I think, my impression is that he was open to suggestions, because it's his first, facility.
Okay. I will say that the blocks, at least in the photos, look like they're fairly light in color. So I'm not particularly worried about them being missed at night. I do agree they're not, attractive at all. The first thing that came to my mind was that he extend his black chain link fence out from the enclosure he's got, so that it can come out and come partway onto the roadway. But that's darker and less visible than the blocks he's got, so that's probably not safe.
He also wants delivery trucks to come to the fence and be seen on a camera, and then to talk to them. So he doesn't want people coming close to the facility without being kind of vetted.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think the right answer is to cut away some pavement, probably put in some concrete curbing, and, better define that as an entrance off of a roadway rather than a continuation of Hall Drive, which is what it looks like now. So I don't know whether that's probably not feasible. But, you know, taking additional concrete blocks and lining them up along there gets us closer to the sort of bomb shelter aesthetic that Karen mentioned, in my opinion. So I'm not crazy about that answer, but you know, every time I go into Hall Drive to the doctor there, and you know, every time I go past that, it looks like it's an abandoned section of roadway that just never got built out. So I agree, it's an eyesore. I'm surprised that the guys at Valley Medical haven't, you know, asked him to do something about it. Chris.
I think whatever we ask him to do has to be really simple and straightforward, and don't leave it up to him to figure it out. So if
Okay.
you have some specific things, if you'd like to meet with him, I can try again to get
Yeah.
him to come and meet with you. But if you have specific things that you want him to do, I think that will be more easily
Well, I
transmitted.
guess one other thought I had was, I think a couple of Jersey barriers would feel less what strange. And they also would have fewer sharp corners that feel like that I'm gonna scratch my car on them. So that if he had a couple of Jersey barriers and those replaced the blocks, personally, I feel like that would be a less threatening configuration. Bruce.
I'll take issue. I'll not take issue. I'll make an argument, Doug, as to why
Okay.
those blocks could be better. It does take a little bit of imagination, and Chris has kind of stuck a spanner in my spoke on that one. But let's say I'm thinking of 12 blocks. I imagine they can be stacked. So I imagine that you could do 2 blocks and 2 blocks. And then on the other side, 2 and 2, and then they could he could attach 2 or 3 pieces of wood horizontally to those that would soften the look considerably, particularly if the blocks were then painted out, so that they were painted dark, so you didn't see them and you had just had the wood, and that would be pretty straightforward, and it would make a big difference, and it would look better.
Can you draw that?
I sure can.
I can show it to him and say, here's what the planning board would like you to do.
Well, are people comfortable with what I just said, and that it would represent? Janet seems to think it's okay.
Not my
Yeah.
area. of
Look,
expertise.
I will do that over break, and I will send it to you in 10, 15 minutes.
All right. Well, if you want to send it to me, I mean, I don't know. Can one of you post it or share the screen after break?
Pam or Nate could do that.
I'll send it to Pam. I've got her email address. I think I do. Maybe
Send
I
it to
don't.
Nate.
Yes, I
Send it to
see.
Nate.
I'll send it to Nate. I know Nate can get stuff from me.
I'm not logged into my work computer, so you would have to send it to my personal
Well, I mean,
email,
you can
and
send it to me and I could share the
Mhm.
screen again.
Send it to both of you.
All right. Well, with that, maybe we want to take our break and give Bruce a chance to draw. I think we're close to the end of this topic, and I think the main thing we have remaining is the design standards comments. So why don't we do that? Well, why don't we just take a break? And so the time now is 7:57. And given that Bruce has got some homework, let's make it a 10-minute break,
Ooh.
and we'll come back at 8:07 and see if Bruce has finished sketching. All right, so turn off your phone, mute your microphone, and we'll come back at 7 minutes after 8. Thank you. Okay, the time is 9 minutes after 8. So I'm hoping folks will reconvene. I see Bruce has already got his hand up. Maybe he's having a problem
He had his hand up when he shut
When-
down.
when he shut down, so
think
I
it's
could just lower
residual.
that. All right.
He'll probably never volunteer again. Just sketching on the move.
Yeah,
It's a good idea, though.
I had no idea how I would transmit what Bruce said to this person, Mr.
Uh-huh.
Irvine.
I
So
think it was a good idea to do the sketch, and
we
I
need
think
a
it'll probably,
drawing. I guess you can't start up again until Bruce comes back because he makes the
he
quorum.
completes my quorum, doesn't he? Yep, he's got us hostage, huh?
We could talk about something other than planning board business. Nate and I could tell you that we met with the Crest team today. And
Oh, yeah.
that was great. It was really interesting. We had a 2-hour meeting with them and we told them about what we do and they told us a little bit about what they expect to be doing. And then they also asked us a lot of questions. So it was a good opportunity to meet them and to, kind of become familiar with each other and let them know how we might be able to help them and vice versa. And yeah, it was a good meeting. So I was glad to be a part of it. And I wanted to thank Nate for being there.
Good. It looks like we got Bruce back. So Bruce, I think we need you to,
I sent the drawing to both you, Doug, and to Nate,
all right.
which is
Check the messages.
basically. that.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
So it hasn't come through yet for me.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'll keep it here then.
Yeah.
So basically, I imagine you can stack those. I didn't look closely at the photograph to verify that, but it would seem logical that one would be able to stack things like that. And there are 12 of them, so he could. Well, there we
Oh,
go.
there we go. Bruce, Nate's brought it up on screen.
Yeah. So I mean, you could put them closer together and have more stacks. Oops, am I muted? No.
No.
And the 16-foot 2 could be preserved or it could be narrowed. I mean, there's some flexibility there, but I think that it doesn't take much imagination to figure out what you could do with that. The boards probably should be pressure treated because they're outside and they'll be screwed to blocks, so they'll be permanently wet behind it. I mean, you could do clever things, just use ordinary timbers and put some washers or something so you got spaces and they would drain out, and then you would have more flexibility in terms of being able to paint them and stain them. And you'd use different width boards. You could put a sign on it that said you could space them differently so that you could the top, you could have 4 instead of 3. You could space the top 2 closer and the bottom one further and use the top 2 for a sign. So there's lots of variations, but pretty basically, you could even do what Karen wants, which I would too. You could hang planters from it, or you could put a tub behind it, or you could do all sorts of things once you got that there. It would look better than those 2 blocks.
Okay.
It looks so much better than those 2 silly blocks, which are, I can see why people would, we're going to get lots of, not complaints even, but just questions. You know, people are going to be calling the DPW to find out whether that's a problem, serious and stuff. At least this will make it look as though somebody did something intentional, and people won't call in reporting a block that got dropped off a truck or something.
Great. Yeah, I think this does look much better. Janet or Karen, any objections to this? Should we let Chris send this off to the owner and have them say this is what we'd like them to do? Karen,
Yeah.
I see your hand.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, Bruce, you're wonderful, very talented and on the spot. I think maybe, Chris, when you talk to him, I don't know if, Bruce, you're amenable to that, have him get in touch with Bruce and you could suggest things. I'm sure he's concerned about costs and wants to do this as inexpensively as possible, but it really is a much, much better solution. And I would also say maybe at some point there should be just some paintings on the driveway, just a line, just like an ordinary street line, those yellow lines in the middle showing that this is not the way that you go, that this is private. And that would also help.
All right, Chris, I see your hand.
Did you have suggestions about what to do about the blocks inside the fence?
Yes, bring them outside the fence and stack them up.
Well, I think if he wants to deviate from the site plan that was approved, that has the dumpster in the area of those blocks inside the fence, and he wants to leave some of the blocks that he doesn't need out here, he should come back to us.
Okay, so if he wants to leave any blocks inside the fence, he needs to come back. But if he wants to use those blocks to create this new barrier or delineation, then you're okay with it. You're okay with him bringing those blocks out. In
Yeah.
any event, you want those blocks to come out from inside the fence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does anybody disagree with that? I think, I mean, basically, we don't know where the dumpster is going to go at the moment, so we'd like to find that out.
Yes, it's shown on the plan, the original plan that was approved, and it's shown in the location of one of these blocks.
Right. So,
Okay, thanks. I will try to get that message across.
all right. Okay, well, thank you, Bruce, for your quick work. All right, so the time now is 8:18, and we'll go on to the 5th item on the agenda, which is the downtown design standards. And I think, Nate, is there anything you want to say before you hear from comments from the board?
No, I mean, I can share my screen and walk through the document. I'll thank everyone for the comments received. We heard from the planning board and members of the public. We did speak with the new director of DEI, Pamela Young, and so we incorporated some of her comments. She also had suggestions for firms that this could be sent to. I sent it to the procurement officer and also to other town staff, and I'm waiting to hear comments. So, I think once, if the planning board has any more comments or there's public comments, we can incorporate them. Typically, accounting and finance might look at it. The procurement officer might look at it, just to make sure that the comparative review criteria are are clear and make sense, because really you want to have a proposal that fits into one category and not both, right? So if we think like the years of experience are too stringent, those might be changed. But typically they don't, if they see something that doesn't make sense in the narrative or scope of services, they might call it out as well. But I'm having them look at it for kind of general structure and does it make sense in terms of how to select a proposal.
Okay. All right, well, if you want, if you would like to go through it, I mean, I had several comments and I can mention them when you get to those sections.
Sure. I'm sharing my screen now, so I'm hoping that's visible.
Yes.
So the introduction, didn't change much. I will say, where there's track changes is what was changed. In this third paragraph here, we say the standards will be incorporated by reference, and that's parenthetical. And then in the scope of services, it says to format the standards as if it were going into a bylaw or as, its own document that is referenced. And so there's a difference there in that if it's a document that's referenced by the bylaw, the document can change without actually having to change zoning, right? So if you periodically update the design standards or guidelines, then it's not actually changing the zoning. The reference is there, and so the document itself doesn't change. And so, we haven't made that decision. What's the best way? We're hoping the consultant has some ideas. At the different communities I've looked at, I've probably looked at about 24 communities, and they do it many different ways. Some do it by reference, some incorporate it, some have it in their general bylaw. So, I think there's probably a few ways to do that. I think that's, something that, is a decision-making point. At the end of the introduction, there's some comments about, really describing Amherst a little bit more in terms of that it is a college town, that it's important. We talked about that. We value sustainability and DEI, and we really want the standards to reflect that, and, allow new development, but be compatible with historic buildings. So, everything that's in red, I don't know, I'm assuming it's red and blue are the new changes.
Nate, my only comment, I had two comments on this page. First of all, the last line of the second paragraph, while also providing standards that respond to and reflect the historic architecture. I probably would delete "and reflect" and simply say that the standards should respond to the historic architecture. I mean, we're not trying to get people to rebuild, in a historic style, as far as I know.
Right.
And so I thought that was adequate. And then under the next paragraph, let's see, I was wondering about the first sentence about having the standards reflect community values of sustainability as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I was having trouble kind of thinking of an example of how diversity, equity, and inclusion would be shown in it or included in a standard of this type, since it's most of them are fairly neutral and more about physical than sort of cultural or behavioral sorts of issues. I know we want a process that's inclusive and allows a wide variety of constituencies to participate, but I was just not sure how this, how that would happen. Have you seen examples?
Yeah, no, not necessarily. I think the following statement or two tries to kind of explain that a bit more, right? So sometimes it may not be the standards, it's that the standards are creating spaces, right, where things can happen. So it may be that, unless we're starting to talk more about public art or, right, maybe some other things that the standards themselves may not address. So, right, typically design standards, you know, may not get to that level of detail, right? I mean, that becomes really all encompassing if you're having standards that try to bring in some of that. It was I agree. In the process, we do mention, the outreach plan and, right, we want the process to be inclusive. I think if others have comments about that, I mean, it could be something that is hard to explain.
Okay, all right. Well, I mean, you've looked at a lot more of these than I have, and I just wasn't sure how that would manifest itself in the standards.
Mhm.
Okay, Janet.
I think you could, I mean, if you're using diversity, equity, and inclusion as sort of like a substitute for sort of people of color, I sort of read that more broadly, that we wanted our downtown to include lots of people and different residents and different economic levels, not just, wealthy people or all students. And so I think there's in the master plan a value that all the neighborhoods are mixed in all sorts of ways. And so I kind of read that more broadly. I think you could say community values, but that's kind of vague. So, I think we want all different types of people using downtown and not just it for one group or another type of thing. That's what I saw that more broadly. Doug, can I ask you a question? So I had some comments on the first page. Should we just, do you want to go through all your things and then we all go one by one?
I thought we were just going to go through it page by page and give our comments as we do that. I had no comments on the first page, so if you did, we can go back and catch up.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. So I was kind of confused by the define the boundaries of town center and why it seemed like that showed up a couple of times in the RFP, and it seemed like an odd thing to kick to the consultant to decide. And it didn't seem to me that it was that up for grabs. And I do think we have a kind of a unique town center in that there's a lot of constraints. We have like a cemetery on one part. We have Amherst College kind of hugging a lot of it. It's not the only place it could really expand would be into, residential neighborhoods. And so I kept on seeing that and I kept on running why, like, are you looking for a recommendation from the consultant to expand it, or don't we know where the downtown is? Or so that was one thing. In the beginning, I think in the third paragraph, you talked about parking strategies, which kind of got my, I was like, oh, maybe they'll be looking at like design or where parking should go. And then I didn't see that carried through. So I wondered if that's what we're really asking the consultant to do is, what are we really asking to do in terms of parking strategies or locations or the look of parking? So that thread wasn't carried through. And I know it's a huge area of concern for people. And then the other thing I thought was sort of big was that another constraint on the downtown is it's surrounded by 3 different historic districts and has some of the most iconic, and the downtown itself has the most historic buildings in Amherst, or at least the ones that are most photographed and presented by the town. And there's no protection for those buildings. And so I thought that should be mentioned early, that there's the Emily Dickinson Historic District. I'm going to mess up the names, Lincoln Sunset one, and then the other newer one. And so that just seems to be sort of something that should come out early, as well as, some of the most historic buildings in Amherst, the churches and town hall are in the town center.
All right, so that's 3 items. Nate, do you want to respond to any of those at this time?
Sure. Yeah, I think, we do want the consultant to develop the design, the area where the design standards would apply. So we're not asking them to define the town center. We're saying define the area of the design standards. So we're not limiting this to just the BG or BL. And so I agree that it could extend into the residential neighborhoods, and it could go north up to UMass or south down to, if they think it could go to, Route 9. And I think the importance there is, in this, we're saying, that there could be it could encompass different zoning districts, and we'd expect that there'd be different standards for those different areas. And so, it may not be just commercial standards that we're looking for. We would want the design standards to apply to, if there's redevelopment on Halleck Street, for instance, what does that look like? Because that is adjacent to, the North Pleasant Street and the commercial core. So it's really not, so, that's what staff would like. We'd like the consultant to, have an on the ground assessment and say, okay, really where, to what, what is the extent of this? Because maybe it's important to have some buffering to, what is the commercial core. And so they can have standards that apply to, some properties that are, a transition area. That's, may or may not be the same as, say, the BL zone.
All right, that was the first question. I think there was one about parking.
Parking. Yeah, I agree. So we say parking strategies here. I think we mentioned it one more time. And so we're not asking the consultant to come up with, do a parking study, but we would like them, right, to address, if you're, if, for instance, they recommend a certain development across the frontage of a lot, then where is the parking? Is it, do you try to have access from the side? Do you minimize curb cuts? And, in general, do they recommend, say a ratio or, what they would expect? So if they're saying you have to have so much commercial or a certain style, is there parking associated with those uses, and just some general strategy. So we're not asking them to do a deep dive into parking. Sure, if we had the money, we could do that. I
And
agree.
then I think the third one was maybe to mention some of the historic districts.
Yeah, yeah.
That could be added to the second page, the red paragraphs about Amherst.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. We referenced the local historic district bylaw as a reference document, and we would provide maps, but I think we can mention those in the narrative as well.
All right, Bruce, you've got some comments?
A couple. Nate, could you scroll down? I want to go back to where, no, sorry, scroll up, I meant to say, to the top, yes. I was confused, both what Doug says and what Janet says, the comments for mine as well. But take Janet's first because it's here. It says, as part of a process to define the boundaries of the center. I mean, you said, well, they're not really defining the boundaries of the center, they're defining the limit of application of the standards. So I think that this is, I understood exactly as Janet is. I said, well, don't we know where the center of, where the boundaries of the center of town are? And you say, that's not the point. Well, I think this is not clear. This is communicating to me, and apparently to Janet as well, that there is uncertainty as to the boundaries of the town center, and we're asking them to get involved in recommending them. So this doesn't say what you said, I don't think, and I'll leave it at that. I mean, it's not something I want to go to the wall on. I just echoing that I had the same impression that Janet did. Mm-hmm. And if you scroll down to where Doug was talking about the community values, because again, I had exactly the same, the town would also like the standards to reflect the community values of blah, 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 blah. And I had the same. I said, how do you do that? And so one possibility would be to put in front of it wherever possible, which means that it's not an obligation that they have to do it. It's an obligation that they should do it where possible. Because this was a little daunting to me. I didn't know how you would do that with standards. So just a suggestion. I don't really need a few to reflect on.
No, thanks, Bruce. Yeah, I agree. I mean, we, the CRC looked at this, I think, or there's some comments about, could we have, we're looking at trying to be, have the net zero buildings or, other things about, including, solar. And so, a lot of the standards that I've seen, they might address it tangentially, but not directly, because, right, it may not be possible to actually have this be fully incorporated. So, thanks for the comments. Yeah, I understand that.
Okay, we're good.
So I think I want to go back to the comment that Janet made and that Bruce reiterated about the limits of downtown. And are you suggesting that this process might recommend new zoning that would allow downtown to expand.
Yeah, so it's a really good point, and it's kind of the crux of it all. So when, some towns will have, to me, what is a clear, say, business district, and they'll say, let's apply design standards to just this area. For me, in staff, we've talked about it. If we do that, we're just saying, let's look at the BG and BL. But I think there's areas outside those zoning districts that could use design standards because maybe perhaps we want redevelopment there, or it will happen. And so, if the consultant is saying, let's look across Triangle Street to what's BL, and we think it could have different massing than what the BL allows, I think that's what the consultant is going to recommend. And then it's the town's decision, do we rezone it to allow for that, what the consultant's saying the design standards have? Because if we're only going to limit it to what the BL allows, there's really not a lot to do in this exercise for the consultant. So I'm thinking that if they say, up North Pleasant Street past Kendrick Park, where there's some vacant properties, what was the gateway? And they said, well, why, what if they say this could be redeveloped into 3 stories and here's some standards that apply there? I think it's then our local decision to say, well, if so, how the zoning right now wouldn't allow that. For instance, is it redefining the town center, or is it really having design standards for certain areas that, I'm not considering that are design standards. We're going to call all of this like a general business design standard. I think that the design standards could have apply to sub-districts, which is mentioned, so that, they're actually coming up with, maybe some overarching standards, and then they're going to tailor it to these few distinct areas, so that, what's allowed on parts of Triangle Street may not be the same as what's allowed on parts of North Pleasant Street.
Okay. Well, I mean, that sort of touches on one question that I'd had about this whole introduction, which, which was kind of what's the attitude toward growth? It wasn't until I got to the end of the long paragraph on the screen right now in the middle that said it is critical that the downtown design standards allow for development. That was sort of the first place where you were saying, yes, we're not just doing design standards within the existing parameters we have right now. We are trying to envision some change. And, so I thought that could be stronger, but I saw it here, and so that seemed adequate.
Yeah, no, I mean, we could be mentioned earlier that we're not limiting it to the existing zoning, right? So that we're not trying to follow the existing zoning dimensional standards or uses. Yeah.
Karen.
You're muted.
Yep, we can't hear you.
Sorry.
There, now we can hear you.
Yeah. So how much will a study of this cost, may I ask? Just a ballpark?
So I laugh because when this was first discussed, we said we had up to $100,000 available. And the assumption is that this might cost more, but so it is a considerable amount.
Yeah. So my question is, I really welcome a holistic sort of look at the town, but a lot of the things that the consultant is doing are already kind of in the master plan, right? We want a more walkable cars out of town, if possible, a vibrant business community. Does it make sense to do a study like this again to get a lot of the details that we've spent many years sort of developing in the master plan? Is it ever done, and this is probably completely naive, is it ever done that we just call out town urban developers that have an expertise? You mentioned in references you wanted to look at Ithaca College, and so I was trying to read what they had done. Some successful developers to just give us a plan. This is how you get a lot of bicycle paths in here. This is how you develop transportation from UMass, something like that. Did we ever consider going that route, or is this a necessary first step, which is going to be very expensive, and they're going to take a lot of time studying the things that we have and already in all those different plans that we have that you listed, 13 or 14 of them. They're going to take a long time to study that and come up to speed. And yes, they're experts, but what about just calling for plans from urban developers that say, look, this is how we can really enliven your town? Is that ever been tossed around?
Yeah,
Thank you.
right. So I agree that in general principle, those are things that are agreed upon and stated. I think what isn't is the detail and the kind of the necessary framework to really make some, have buildings or the built environment look like we, like something we want. So here's the City of College Place is one that, if this is visible, I change my sharing that, what's done here is okay, just some, first page, but they're already indicating what they would like. And so what was nice about this standard was, it's both graphic, and what I like about it is for each area, they have an intent of what they're looking for, they have criteria, and then they have, specific to that place, images. And so, the master plan talks about, yes, vibrancy and walkable, but it doesn't really say, like, what does that mean? Is that an 8-foot sidewalk, or is that a 12-foot sidewalk? Is that a 4-story building, or is that, how much glazing on the first floor? Is it street trees? And so, I think I think everyone has a different opinion of what's appropriate and what that looks like. And so, and it's not really codified or, in a way that it can be applied consistently right now. And so that's what, we're hoping with these standards. So, here, for this, this is, it was done for a specific place. It's actually applied at the county level. So it's, this is in Washington State. So it's a county commission that does the permitting here. But I just, I think these, every, the intent and everything is very clear. And then they use these illustrations with, with annotations and some, some dimensions to show what they really like. And so, I would like to think that the consultant would come to Amherst, look at those plans, and we do say that the emphasis is on the design standards and not, an exhaustive analysis of existing conditions and documents, because we do have a lot. But take what we have and say, okay, here's how we can come up with design standards that respond to what Amherst is asking and what's built. And so, I think, so for me, I think something like this is really informative. I can jump to Ithaca. They did something similar too. They're much bigger. This is a college town, but they had the same kind of philosophy, where they have, this is their design guidelines. So they have, an introduction, their guiding principles, and then site design for specific things. So surface parking, driveway access, service areas. And, right now we don't have that kind of level of detail in the zoning bylaw. And so I'd like to think that the design standards would have a similar format that when, for instance, if there's a new project proposed, where the spoke is, for instance, we would have some of this to say, here's, here are the ingredients. This is what we're looking for. If you'd like a 4-story building, here's the type of window pattern, maybe material. Here's how it relates to the curb in the street in terms of pedestrian, experience. If we want awnings or so. Anyways, I agree that I think there's a lot already done. It just hasn't really been synthesized and then done to this level.
And Nate, I could add on, as for Karen's benefit, as a member of the planning board, when we approved the last Archipelago building, that's I guess it's 11 East Pleasant, that's going up now. We have our zoning that gives us height and setbacks, but we don't have a lot about the articulation of the building. And I think it's been my understanding that, some people like the buildings that Archipelago is putting up and some people don't. And there's differing opinions about the street level of those buildings and how transparent they are and whether they are conducive to commercial occupants or tenants or not. You know, we know they've had a hard time renting all of the first floor of One East Pleasant. And I think some of us think that some of the columns that come all the way down on that building are really not encouraging commercial occupancy. So there's details like that that I think I was hoping would come out of this process.
Yeah, on the other hand, what's to say we're having a competition for this part and everybody submit your plans and then we see in those 5 plans what seem.
Well, I
Is-
think the
is that
thing
not
is that
possible?
to have a competition for a design for property that the town doesn't own, there's no incentive for a developer to propose something for land they don't control or that we don't control.
Okay, that's the hitch. Yeah, I
Okay,
get it. Yeah, thank you.
so this is our way of suggesting to both the landowner and the developers, here's what here's how we'd like it to go.
I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I will say that, you know, my hope is that they do look beyond just North Pleasant Street and into, you know, the adjacent properties. And, you know, I'm calling them kind of sub-districts of design standards. And I'd like to think that we could extrapolate that and say, okay, well, could we apply these in East Amherst or in other areas as well? And so, you know, parts of the design standards could then apply other places. You know, and we, you know, hopefully we'd have enough information that we could make that work. And so, you know, we're focusing on the town center for now, but, you know, if it's, I'm hoping it's done in a way that we could say, okay, can we take pieces of this and then have it apply in other areas as well?
Well, Nate, you could structure it as not site specific, but different types of environment. You know, like here's the most highly urban type of environment Amherst would want. And here's the second most, and here's a village center. And then it's not site specific and you just
Right.
apply it wherever we want to apply it. Janet.
I'm actually very enthusiastic about doing a downtown design process with the community. I think it would bring people together for us to sort of say, I mean, Doug, remember you saying this way back when you started on the board, you know, is there agreement on heights? Is there agreement on setbacks? Is there agreement on look? And I think my hope is in this process with flexibility, we will come to an agreement and be part of a community process of putting together something. I think that the way this is worded in terms of the language that about expanding the downtown is opening up a can of worms. And so I think the goal is to build support, not dissension. And I think if people thought, oh, this is the gateway coming back, or my neighborhood is now going to become part of a commercial district, people are just going to lean in and against it. And I don't think we want to do that. I think, you know, there's a lot of room to build up now in downtown. We have a lot of single-story buildings. And I think the question is if we can put in design standards that show that the buildings, we have figured out what we want to see as a community, the buildings come in, you're building support for increased density that people like. And I do think that, you know, next when we look at hopefully East Amherst Village Center, we probably don't want the same heights as downtown, but people will know what the look is. They'll feel comfortable with it. Maybe in 10 or 15 years, they'll want to expand the downtown, but I wouldn't put that onto the consultant because I think they're going to run into a wall. And that's really a decision for the town council to make, for us to recommend. I would just take that off the table and just focus on our downtown. I don't, the BL, the BG, I don't know if we're going to go down to the Emily, down to the, business neighborhood, by Bruno's or not. But I think if this language persists, people are going to be very suspicious in the start. I don't think we want to create with that tone. if this process works and we have good designs, we have a stronger community and we'll be happier and we'll have development that's bigger, and, just helping our town in every way. I just think this language is too open to construction. And when you're talking about the gateway or going more into the neighborhoods, I think people are going to be really immediately opposed.
Right, but I don't see this as just a commercial downtown design standard. I think it's, if the properties along Kellogg Ave, on the north side going back, the first stretch, they could be torn down and rebuilt at some point. And so, we don't have anything guiding that. And that's, adjacent to the downtown. It's in a residential zone, but I think it'd be nice to have design standards applied there. And so to me, that's part of the town center. To me, the town center isn't, just one property off of North Pleasant Street. It's a much bigger area. And so, Doug kind of said it in terms of, there's like archetypes of like where we want the design standards to apply, different, environments. And so I'm not envisioning this as just, the main corridor, but also what's happening, a few properties back. What does that look like in terms of height and facing the street and design standards? So, yeah, I mean, I think that some residents may be concerned. We're not saying that we're going to be promoting, commercial development in a residential neighborhood, but what I'm saying is we can have design standards if there's going to be big changes. We have some ability here to say what we want it to look like.
All right. I guess if we can move on. It's 10:09, so let's see. You want to say anything about this third page?
The scope of services, Doug?
Yeah, I mean, I really didn't have any comments on this page. Did others? Janet?
I'm not sure if it goes into the task 1 or task 2, but I thought that it'd be good for the consultants to meet early on with kind of the planning board, the ZBA, the historic commission, the design review board, disability access. I just thought that should happen earlier in the process because we're all dealing all the time with this area and get feedback from the public a lot. So I thought it'd be good to put us in earlier in the process.
Okay, Janet, I actually completely agree with that. And I had that comment when I saw the presentations to those boards and committees under task 4, kind of what, did we have any involvement earlier? And I guess the way you've structured it, our basic opportunity is to participate in the public process as private citizens. And that may be fine, but I think some of us, would be happy to have more involvement as a board.
Well, I think it would help the consultants to hear our experience, working with this.
Okay. Bruce. You are muted.
My apologies.
There you go.
Task 2, we've scrolled up and down and through it, but so scroll down a little, Nate, if you would. Stop. I noted here where it says conduct stakeholder meetings, interviews, it's focus groups, there should be 5 to 7 stakeholders. So what I did was when I was looking at this, I noted that that various tasks say public forums, neighborhood workshops, at least 3, attend public events, at least 3, hold public meetings, at least 3, hold presentations, at least 6. And I wondered why there was no at least a number of stakeholders meetings suggested. Is there a reason why we wouldn't do what we've done for all of the other stated events like these, that you would want to put a number of stakeholders meetings? Was that just omitted, or was it omitted intentionally? I mean, the number of, the minimum number of.
Yeah, it was totally intentional. No, yeah, good point. I was thinking that it would be, we list a fair number of who we'd want as stakeholders, and so, yeah, no, maybe it would be good. I mean, it was only intentional in the thought that it would be something we could talk about with the consultant to say, okay, let's have 8, but maybe if we think we're going to have a lot of focus groups, we should just say that so that they, are understand what our expectation is. So, I wasn't trying to limit the number of focus groups. I was just thinking it was something that would be, discussed and negotiated, but perhaps we would want to put, like you said, a minimum or, or some approximate number just so it's clear.
It helps the scope. I mean, this is really the scope of work, and all of the other attend 3 public events to present information and receive comment. You've been specific, and so the consultant can add up the number of events that they either have to attend or that they have to host themselves, initiate themselves, and that'll give them some idea. And I just thought that probably what will happen is the consultants in making their proposal would ask, or they would state in their proposal, and maybe that's what you would want. But it just seemed that it was just different in the stakeholders meetings were treated differently in the proposal. That's all.
I mean, Nate, you did ask for a pretty detailed sort of schedule of work and an outline of how they would do the process. So, I mean, you could just leave it to them to propose a certain number, and then use that as part of the differentiation between teams. But I mean, Bruce is right here. You have been a little bit inconsistent. Okay. Bruce, you can take your hand down, and Janet, you're next.
In terms of stakeholder meetings, I think 60 or 70% of our population are UMass students. And I thought, obviously, it'd be hard to meet with them all, but I thought that they should be pulled out as a separate group because they're probably a huge user of downtown, maybe Amherst College students, but I feel like that's the majority of who lives in Amherst, and they should be there should be outreach to the campuses and things like that. I'm not sure of stakeholder meetings, but I think that could be one thing. But we have a lot of students in town, and we want them to come downtown in a peaceful and shopping manner. But they, what do they want to see downtown?
Well, be careful what you ask for, Janet. They're going to want lots of housing and plenty of bars or something.
Or maybe not, but I think they should be, they already have, so.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
They might want cheaper housing than, $1,500 a bed,
Right. All right. Any
So
other
there is
comments?
a public hand, an attendee.
I'm sorry.
An attendee has their hand up.
Oh, okay. Well, I did see Dorothy's hand. And I thought we would go through the board members' comments and then turn to the public.
Sure. Should I keep scrolling down? Is that?
Yeah, I think so.
And so, just to Bruce's point and what we've said, we're in the scope of services. We've added some language. Sorry for the scrolling up here. Some of it is we can have some contract negotiations, and so we're asking the consultant to meet this scope of work, but and explain it with their methodology and their proposal, but also perhaps depending on cost, where can the town staff help things? So Doug, you said, wow, this scope could be more than what we have budgeted. And for instance, if the consultant would like to do a visual preference survey, they could essentially maybe get the images and structure it they want to, but then staff could perhaps administer it, right? We could solicit it, we could get the comments, the feedback, and then compile the data and get it to the consultant, so they're not spending their time doing that. And so I like the idea of getting boards and committees engaged earlier, and maybe that becomes in task 2. At the same time, I'm not sure I want the consultant to go to 8 different boards and committees at the beginning, so maybe it's a consolidated thing, but I think mentioning it is important. So again, if maybe they have experience that they would write into their proposal about how to achieve all this, right? How they can structure their own engagement processes, and we're asking them to do that, to come up with an engagement plan. So hopefully we say it, and then they can, if they have some other ideas, they can present that. All right, so task 3, task 4, then here's task 5. So there were some changes.
Nate, hold on, Janet's.
Sorry. You may have already, this might be something the town is planning on anyway, but I thought about like an interactive website where you could have examples or surveys or comments or discussion, or, like consolidating feedback. Like, I don't know that the consultant would administer it, but they may have experience with that kind of thing, like how to involve the public and inform the public. So I don't know where that would go, but it seemed like that would be really important, especially with the students and people who aren't able to get to meetings.
Right. So we have Engage Amherst, and we also have the Civic Plus, the traditional Amherst. So I think there's ways to do that. I agree. I'm hoping that as part of their proposal, we're asking them to come up with a community engagement plan and a strategy. And so if they're saying, there's a web presence, there can be online surveys, there can be other ways to do it. Planning staff, we can meet with IT and the community outreach officers and come up with, what the town can do. Sometimes consultants say, oh, I have a subscription to these services and I can put it on this other platform. They might belong to, a community forum website that they can easily adapt for the project, or if not, we can do it. So yeah, I'm hoping that they, that's part of the comparative review. What are they going to bring in terms of that kind of those strategies?
All right. Why don't you scroll on down? I don't see any hands yet. When you get to section 6, I had a comment.
Sure.
So you have a lot about the team, but you never define it. And, at least my experience with offices of this sort is you have a couple of people who are highly experienced, many years in the field. And then as you move down the hierarchy, people are younger and less experienced. And, I think what it seemed to me that what you really want to know is who are the representatives of the firm that are going to be the face of this process. Who is it that's always going to be the moderator of the meetings? And, do they come across as experienced and credible? And I think you also had something maybe in the comparative analysis about, encouraging some diversity of gender and race or whatever cultural backgrounds in that. So, I think as a respondent, you want to try to adjust your definition of the team to meet your requirements, right? So, if I have 20 years of experience, but I'm going to have 4 people who are younger and are going to do my computer renderings and the grunt work, and they only have 5 years of experience, maybe I don't meet the 7 years minimum. And so I just think you need to be, you're sort of opening yourself up to people gaming the way they define the word team at the moment. And maybe that's fine, but when you look at a team, it's the people in the office. Sometimes there's sub-consultants, and it could be a pretty big group that's actually the team. And you probably don't want all of them to show up at the evening meetings. So, that can affect your fee in addition. So I think I felt like you should be a little more strategic about what does team mean, or maybe it's who are the representatives who are, who are the face of the firm?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. There's also some comments, there's been some comments made that, we also don't want to discourage young and, kind of maybe innovative professionals who may not have the experience. So I think I agree that, we could define team. We've had this discussion in other procurement, procurements. And so we're asking the consultant to provide kind of how they define it themselves, right? So we're saying it could be anywhere from engineers to architects to landscape architects to, sustainability consultants. So I'm not
Okay,
sure.
all right.
Right now, I'm, I think it's a good point. I think staff can talk about it. Again, I'm hoping as part of the review criteria, they're submitting, and number 4 here, we have the project manager. So we're hoping that they give us an outline of what the team is. Is it 5 members? Is it 7 members? What is the experience and resume of all those members on the team? And then because it's not this is both kind of a qualitative and kind of a quantitative review. It's not just that, oh, they have this, 2 people who have 30 years experience and then they're doing all the work. And then they have the, 1 or 2 people that are doing this. We like to see the breadth of the entire team and how they collaborate together. So, I'm hoping that that's what we're expecting that's what they're going to present in their proposal, describe
Okay.
how the team works. Yeah.
All right, so my only other comment in this area, and it wasn't exact, I mean, it doesn't have to be addressed in this area, was, we now do a lot of meetings remotely over computer. And so, when on item 4 here, where you talk about public meetings and evening meetings, I don't know whether you want to leave it up. I mean, you'll need to have some level of conversation about how many meetings do you expect them to come here for and be in person versus doing over the Zoom platform. And so, whether you want to direct them at this point in some direction about that, or just leave it to the way how they want to respond. That is something that you haven't mentioned here. That you realize there will be a couple of different delivery, ways of meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything else on this page, board members? All right, moving along. Okay, so when you got to comparative review on page 9, so you have all these criteria for comparative review, but there's never any mention of fee. And are you going to be judging these at all on the basis of fee, or are you going to have them put their fee in a separate envelope and you don't open it until you've selected who you want to work with?
Right. So this is we don't see the fee at all. So we don't know what any of the consultants' fees are. So your latter comment's correct. So this is, going to be a quality-based review based on their proposal and responses. And we only take, we'll only see the fee of the selected proposal. So it's not at all fee-based. If we're going to go that route, really, we would not have comparative review, and we take the lowest qualified bidder, the lowest price of the qualified bidder. So, that's something we're saying we don't necessarily want, because, we'd like to be able to have interviews and review proposals and see, what team, has, the best fit for Amherst and has, really, it's a comparative review amongst all proposals submitted. So, it's really how, what's the best proposal, compared to the rest that we've received.
All right, Bruce. You're muted.
My spacebar depression doesn't seem to work anymore. That was usually my go-to for short mute, unmute. Simply on this page, the second line, second sentence, projects meeting the minimum requirements. Do you not mean proposals meeting the minimum requirements?
Right.
And then I'll have another word, but that's on page 11.
I guess my only I had one other sort of comment on, I guess it was topic number 1, the comparable projects. I guess it seems like the pandemic has kind of was a real interruption on a lot of sort of design processes. And I guess I just wondered whether it was going to be feasible for anybody to have, you know, as many projects within the last 7 years as you were suggesting, and whether, you know, anything happened in college towns in the last 3 years. So you may end up with several, you know, a majority of the proposals not being most advantageous, you know, maybe only a few that are advantageous. And I just wondered whether that's going to discourage people from even proposing, you know, if they say, well, you know, I've done projects, you know, I've done 3 projects in the last 7 years and I'm going to be not advantageous. Why would I do this? So I was just wondering whether it would make sense to reduce your threshold at all. But
Yeah,
you know,
I think
you've
Chris
looked
raised her hand
around.
and say, I think Chris would agree that this could be reduced or changed. And so, yeah, I'm not disagreeing. When we're right. So like I said, I was trying to create those 3 categories to have some clear distinction. And so if we want to, you know, change one, we can change them all perhaps. And I'm okay with that. I agree that, you know, maybe this is too aggressive. I mean, if we're thinking that the project we have in hand could take 18 to 24 months, and then we're asking that they've, you know, done 4 of these in 7 years, it's an accelerated schedule than what we're even asking. So,
Well, it also caused me to wonder whether your target audience is firms in Massachusetts, or are you open to having firms who are coming from a farther distance? Because obviously, if you let the firms from outside of the state participate, you know, you're more likely to get people with more experience, but then you're going to be paying for travel costs. And, you know, I think within Massachusetts, I don't know how many firms could do this.
that's a good point. I think, yeah, the way this will be advertised, it'll be, you know, advertised locally, but it'll also be advertised, you know, at the state level. So, you know, in the central register and goes in bulletins. So I think firms regionally will see this. So, you know, anyone who subscribes, you know, any company who's looking to do public work usually subscribes to some of the services that this will be posted in. So it's not necessarily that we're targeting firms from, you know, Virginia, but it could be that they see it and maybe they often collaborate with someone out of Boston and they say, hey, let's put a proposal together.
Okay.
You know, but yeah, so I to your point though, I think, you know, Chris, we talked about this internally that maybe we have to change some of these measurements because it is, like I said, a little strict. But back to who's, you know, so one thing I was going to say tonight is we can reach out to certain firms and say, here's, look what we're doing, but we're also, this is going to go through a pretty public advertisement process, and you know, it'll get out there. And so I was going to say, when we did the comprehensive housing market study in the 2000 teens, you know, I was surprised to see we had companies, you know, we had someone from California or, you know, like places that had never been to Amherst that somehow saw our request for proposal and they were responding. You know, and it's so when this is advertised, that's what we will get.
Okay, great.
I
Great.
wonder, you know, maybe to help the 2-year pandemic or 2.5-year thing, just make it a longer period, like 9 years. You know,
And Chris, you have your hand up.
I guess I just wondered, do we have to say what the duration of time is? Can we just say 3 similar projects? Do we have to say within a certain period of time? Is that required, Nate?
No.
So, you know, I think that people would necessarily want to show, you know, their best work, which is probably their recent work if they've been building up experience. So I'm thinking that maybe we don't need to have that time period so prominent. maybe we could stretch it out. Maybe we could say, like Janet said, 9 years or 12 years or something large, so that we're not constraining people. Because I think a lot of these firms aren't only going to be doing urban design and urban planning. They're also going to be building buildings, and they're going to be designing parks, and they're going to be doing a lot of other things. So, if they had 3 or 4 similar projects, it would be kind of amazing that they would have that many similar projects to this in a short amount of time. So I'm all for either elongating the time or not having it.
All right. So anybody else have comments on this page? I have no more comments on the document. Bruce.
Well, I've got a couple of comments. If we go down to page 11, there's a word, I guess, where are we? I'm just going to have to swipe over to, whoops, sorry. Here we go. Yes. Okay, come back. Oh, there we go. Right at the bottom there. Provide a dynamic presentation. I guess I'm just allergic to the use of the word dynamic. And I would vastly prefer, if I were reading this and trying to imagine that responding it, that I would be challenged to provide a cogent presentation rather than a dynamic one. And I don't know whether that's your preference as well, Nate, but dynamic just seems to be one of those words that people use when they can't think of anything else to say.
I couldn't, so that's so great for the suggestion. No, yeah, again, it was interesting when we asked for presentations. That means everyone who's submitting a proposal has to be given the opportunity to give a presentation. And so it's not like we can say we're going to do the first round and then the second round is going to have a presentation. That means if we get 15 proposals, all 15 proposals will include a presentation. And then the difficulty is, what's the comparative review criteria? So how do we extinguish between an advantageous and a more advantageous presentation? And so if you think a dynamic presentation is really not explaining that very well, then we can change that. And so
I've heard some really awful dynamic presentations that have really made my skin crawl and made me want to run out to the room or get rid of them as quickly as possible and get on to the next contender. So dynamic doesn't do it for me, but cogent does. But there are there's probably other words that go
compelling or engaging.
Engaging's good.
I actually felt the same way. I just thought it seemed like I would go for a very calm, thorough, showing a mastery of the project, the process, a history of past success. I don't need to be thrilled. And I thought in a way it was like, I just thought a laid back person or an introvert who could deliver the goods, is fine with me.
Well, right. So then, yeah. So I guess then it's agreed. It doesn't. So then what is the distinction between the categories then? Right? Is it the amount of information, the mastery? So we're trying to also show. Right. I think we could eliminate this and and then have that. It's really how is the information presented? How informative is it? What kind of mastery do they show? And so really that's the comparative piece, not.
I mean, you could just take the word out and it still reads as a sentence.
Right.
Yeah.
An understanding of the project, because that's how much attention they pay to what we're asking to do is going to be really helpful to evaluate them, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if they call Amherst a city all the time.
But we are, Nate. Where is-
And Doug,
Can I just
have
say one thing that the second and third indicate that there's an understanding, but the first one doesn't. So maybe you need to add that to the first one. An understanding of the project,
pretty
right?
definitely, I would say.
Oh, is that missing? Okay,
Yeah.
usually it's, all right, yep.
maybe a deep understanding
Mhm.
Yeah.
or thorough.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you can do that in your own time, I guess.
Yeah, I'm just gonna put
well-
that right here for now, but, all right.
Okay. And apropos of that, when I read it, it wasn't clear, this whole business of interviewing and face to face, and I thought it's not clear to me that there is, and maybe this is because this is a different way of doing business than I'm used to, but I'm used to when you're receiving proposals from people, from groups, and there may be many, and you shortlist a few and you interview them. And you have this face-to-face engagement, and there's not just a presentation, but there's a question and answer and so forth, where through a process by which you can get a feel for the chemistry, the human chemistry of the people that you are contemplating working with for a year or two. And so first of all, it didn't seem to, it wasn't clear that you were shortlisting, and maybe you're not. It wasn't clear that they were face to face, and it wasn't clear that there was a to and fro, a question and answer process.
So yeah, we can't shortlist, so everyone has to be reviewed using the same criteria. So we can't, narrow it down from 7 to 3 and then have a different review process for those 3. It's really, the review process is for everyone, and we make a decision. In the standard boilerplate, we do allow for a question and answer, but not material questions and answers. So it's really if there's something that, kind of like we did tonight, if there's a misunderstanding or we need clarification, but we wouldn't be able to ask, one consultant to provide different information that we're not asking another, proposal. So it's, really kind of, we have to follow this standard process. And, I think some of it could be in the past, regulations can be updated or, reinterpreted. And so, yeah, I think, 15 years ago, if the town were doing this, we may have followed a different process. But
Okay.
since then we've had different guidance or things have been up. I know in 2016 and 18, the state's procurement regulations were updated. And so I think they've taken out some of that, I don't know if we call it ambiguity, but that ability to shortlist and then have different criteria for, say, the 3 as opposed to the all of that submitted proposal. So I feel like they've, may have changed some of that than what was done in the past.
So I guess this is just a different process. For example, with the school, the town, so this is, I guess, a submission, a statement of qualifications or something like that, and there's in a form that allows you then to say, this is the set of qualifications or that I prefer, and you choose those, because it seems possible that if you got a dozen or 15 respondents and you're obligated to interview everybody, that's really onerous. So I guess you must imagine that you're not going to get just a large number of respondents here, and that you're comfortable or you don't feel threatened by the workload associated with winnowing down the respondents.
Yeah, no, I think it will actually be, a task for the committee. So on that point, I'm considering like probably a 5-person review committee. The town manager has to first, approve of this and say that it's necessary, which, he's been briefed on it. And then the town manager appoints a review committee. The review committee would review proposals independently and then together as a group. And then, also with the proposal, the presentations. And so, I mean, it could be that that we receive, 8 to 12 proposals, and it is a time commitment. And so, I guess we just have to set aside that time.
Yeah. Okay, so it's helpful. This is not the way. This is an unfamiliar way of doing business, but that's fine. I don't. I just need to know that in terms of what I've been reviewing here.
Okay, all right. So I want to just mention it's 25 after 9. So I was hoping this wasn't going to be a really late meeting. So I think we're close to the end of the document. Unless board members have another more additional pressing comments, I'd like to go to the public and let the comment that the woman that's got her hand raised and has had it for quite some time make her comment. So Pam, could we bring Dorothy Pam in and let her make her comment?
Okay, Nate, can you stop
and
sharing
Pam-
your screen?
Pam,
Sure, yeah.
thank you for your patience.
There we go.
Hello, Dorothy, if you'd give us
Hi,
your name and your
How are
address.
you? How are you?
Very
Uh,
well.
I have a number of comments to make, but the first one that just occurred to me this exact last moment, there was something way back there about diversity or whatever, and I thought, okay, there was some attempt, I believe, at social justice to be as a consideration in here. And I thought of certainly a way there could be some, and that could be that if they're going to be apartment buildings, that there be a larger number of affordable units. They could be at a variety of affordable levels, but that if there's going to be apartments, that it not just be these high, very expensive student rentals. So that may have been what was behind the mind of whoever wrote that word in. So our first question is, were you planning to change the overlay district downtown, which says there's no parking because people don't need cars because we have a bus, because we now know that the demand for parking is in fact there and is not going away. Because I think that's a very important issue and it's not mentioned or addressed except in considering parking. Secondly, I'm a little concerned you might be removing the buffer between the dense commercial district and the established residential district, which I would not like. Again, I hope that you're not going to allow high rises on both sides of Kendrick Park. I happen to be very fond of the buildings that are there or buildings of that style, but I do not want to see the park shaded with high rises on both sides, which was something we mentioned a while back. I think that you need to give the architectural firms some guidance on what you have in mind, because do you want them to kind of follow UMass's brutalist style of architecture, or to take a look at our historic downtown in the block of North Pleasant Street, near Town Hall, or some of the other historical residential areas in town. Otherwise, you could get a lot of really crazy designs that would cause a lot of people to have a heart attack. But I also am very concerned about the outreach groups, which are limited to 5 or 7, and the whole list of categories is there. And of course, that would mean that somebody from a residential neighborhood would be one of them, and would be, so by deliberately limiting these groups to 5 to 7, that may be the consequence intended or unintended, which would discourage people from participating, because they would say, well, what's the point? So the last question is this money already set aside? I thought there was some sense that this money was actually in a pot somewhere. Because if not, given some of the harsh realities we're just discovering in terms of our capital projects, I have questions about the financing of it. So those are my comments and questions. Thank you very much for letting me offer these. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Dorothy. Nate, do you want to comment on any of those? I mean.
Yeah, I
the
mean,
comment- Go
Yeah, I
ahead.
think the funding is in place, so it was a capital request or a request of the planning department the other year. So I think that's, that's good. Yeah, and back to like what, the focus groups, I think we would have a minimum. I mean, we're hoping that the consultant does everything from, these focus groups that could be anywhere from, 70 to 90 people to other outreach efforts. And so, and it may be that there a lot of time and money can be spent on outreach. And so, if the consultant thinks there's other ways to engage the town, whether like Janet said, through its online surveys, or if they think the town could do it, staff could do it. So we're not spending
Mhm.
consultant money on outreach. I think, that can be part of the process. So we're
okay.
not
Yeah.
trying to limit who's involved. It's just, that's a kind of a time consumptive effort. And, I think the consultant, can do that. And I think we can try to help augment what their service is, but we'd love to have their expertise in the design piece. Yeah, and then, really what's appropriate for architecture. So I think, when we staff meets with them, and if they meet with the boards and committees earlier in the process, I think we'll hear that there's, kind of different opinions on what's appropriate downtown, what's good architecture, what's bad architecture. And so, I'd like to have these experts say what is appropriate. So is it a blending of style? Is it okay that we have modern looking buildings, but it's appropriate because the proportions, the rhythm, the patterns, the setback, the height all make sense. And so, I have my ideas, and, everyone has theirs. So I'm relying on the consultant to do that. And I do think, Janet, you said at one point, I just want to say, like, the height of buildings and what are we doing here? And, back to the parking district. Yeah, I mean, right now we define height in our bylaw a certain way, in that, it doesn't include the parapet, it doesn't include HVAC or equipment on the roof. And I'd like the consultant to say, this is what I think is appropriate, because, essentially people can add height to their building and massing by putting things on the roof that's not calculated into height. And so, that's something I'd want the consultant to look at. In terms of the municipal parking district, yeah, we're not asking them to specifically address the district, but if they say, given the development patterns of Amherst, and here's some parking strategies, and they think that parking could be provided or should be, then, then it's our local decision to say, okay, maybe the municipal parking district has run its course and now it's time to change it. It was offered as a kind of an incentive to help development downtown. We have development downtown, and so is it time to, look at that again? And so, I'm hoping the consultant touches on that a little bit.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Nate, and thank you, Dorothy. Pam Rooney has her hand up. Why don't we bring her over? You could give us your name and your address.
This is the plethora of Pams tonight. Thank you for letting me in. And I wanted to say thank you to Bruce for asking for the names to be read at the beginning of the meeting. I think that, been asking for that for quite a while, and that's very nice. Specific comments, a couple people have already touched on the fact that having a meeting with the planning board, ZBA, DAC, DRB earlier in the process, maybe they get treated like a stakeholder group, so that because you are the people that are being asked to interpret today's zoning bylaws. How do these guidelines inform your process, and how do they help you? And I think that would be really helpful to get that. I had the same question about why do you limit the stakeholder group size to 5 to 7? I think for I can't remember what the process was. Oh, it was the 40R process, where the stakeholders were all of the business or the building owners, property owners in downtown, and some business owners, no neighbors. That appeared to be the stakeholder group. I think each of these categories, you definitely might have more than 5 to 7 people. I don't think that would add cost to having a stakeholder meeting by having a slightly larger group. Thinking about some of the selection characterizations like the presentation of the proposal. When I look at advantageous, the presentation and development team provide an understanding of the project. The presentation is clear and informative, and all team members participate. That's what I want to see. So that's quite advantageous to me. If you wanted to make it most advantageous, perhaps you include something about a deep understanding of the project and a well-described engagement process, or something, you know, the public involvement process that appears to be reasonable and all-encompassing, or something to that nature. And that's it for now, but thank you.
Thank you, Pam.
Yeah, thanks. And sorry, I just want to say, maybe I misunderstood Dorothy's question. So yeah, I just changed that, right? I think we could have more stakeholders in each focus group. So I apologize to Dorothy if I misunderstood that. So I agree. So we could have, you know, have more people in each focus group. You know, so yeah, I think we can do that.
Maybe you have 5 to 7 stakeholder meetings.
Right.
That'd be the quantity that you were looking for earlier. The last thing I wanted to say before I forget is that I am completely delighted that you are at this point where you're getting ready to do an RFP for this very, very important project.
All right. Thank you, Pam.
Come on it.
All right. Nate, we've gotten our comments. And Chris, do you know if any of the other board members who were not present this evening have sent any in? You are muted.
Muted? No, I don't believe they have. We can reach out to them again if you think.
Yeah, if you don't mind doing that, just to remind them that this is their chance to weigh in. So thank you, Nate, for the presentation and all your work. All right, unless there's anything else anybody wants to say about this topic, I guess we will consider this closed for this evening. The time is 9:36, and I guess we can go on to the parts of the agenda on page 2. Chris, starting with old business, anything not anticipated 48 hours in advance?
No old business.
All right, what about new business?
No new business.
All right, I think I saw in my packet some Form A&R drawings. So
There is a
Pam, you
Form
want to
A.
bring those up?
Pam's done a good job of exploring this. It's
Yes, but
rather
I'm-
complicated. Do you want to talk about it, Pam, or do you want me to talk about
I
it?
think you should just go ahead and talk about it, but I've got lots of slides here to back you up and support you.
Okay, so this property is located on Pelham Road. It's east of the Fort River, east of the bridge, and it's almost to Poets Corner. And it's one of these long, narrow lots that was created a long time ago. I think the front house was built in 1900 and the back house was built in 1950. And it's owned by a group of siblings, and they would like to be able to sell the property and get some remuneration from it, from the estate. And one of the siblings wants to live in the front house. So what they're proposing to do is they're proposing to connect the area shown in yellow to the blue area. So they want to make one big lot. And then they want to subdivide that lot. And Pam, if you can show us yeah, that's great. So the green lines are showing the property line between the yellow property on the previous drawing and the blue property. The green lines are showing that property line going away. So that little piece at the very bottom of the property is going to be added to the whole. And then the front property, the area shown in red, is going to be carved off, and that will contain the one house at 101 Pelham Road. And then the other property, including that back area, is going to contain the other house at 103 Pelham Road. And the people here have already gone to the Zoning Board of Appeals and they've received a variance. And they need a variance for this property because it's got a lot of anomalies. It's got, it's not a very wide property, so it's really hard to do anything here. But there are a number of setback issues that are problematic. And in addition to that, it's unusual to have two houses on one property, so they want to move them apart. They don't really have enough frontage to have a flag lot. They have 76 feet, roughly 76 feet of frontage altogether. I think this is in the RN zoning district, so they would normally be required to have 120 square feet of frontage. They would have been required to have a 120-foot building circle in the middle of this property, but they obviously can't do that because this is too thin. And there are setback issues. So they received a variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals to accomplish what is shown on this plan. And so the next step for them is to actually take the step of dividing the property into two properties. And you can see that one property is going to have about 16 feet of frontage, which is enough to allow cars to travel back and forth. The other property will have about 60.7 feet of frontage. And both properties will have the ability to travel over this driveway, just as they've always done in the past. So I think that's all I have to say. And you may have some questions. And you did receive a copy of the variance text in your packets.
So we don't, it's already been decided that this configuration is allowable or, approved by variance.
That's
And
correct.
so all you want us to do is to agree that this does not require a subdivision plan.
That is correct. And then authorize the chair, Mr. Marshall, to sign the plan on behalf of the planning board.
Okay. All right, so board members, any questions? Any objection to me signing this and agreeing that that this does not require subdivision approval? Your silence is deafening. So I'm gonna take that as a consensus, Chris, that we are okay with this, and you will tell me when I can come sign it.
Thank you. And thanks to Pam for providing the good information. She asked some good questions and we had a meeting with the building commissioner, so we were all clear on what was going on here.
I think this is the first variance I've ever seen issued by the ZBA.
Yeah.
They don't issue very many.
Seriously.
It's really unusual for them to issue a variance.
Yeah, well, it's a change to the bylaw that you don't want to have everybody saying they can do it, right? So it's got to be really odd and special, and hardship is the controlling requirement here, is it?
Hardship and shape of the lot.
Okay.
But we're good. I mean, I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay. You're great, Bruce. Okay. Let's see, that was item 8 on our agenda. The time now is 9:43. Pam and Chris, any upcoming ZBA?
Nothing new to
Pam's.
report.
All
No,
right.
not tonight.
How about SPP, SPR, and SUB applications?
Yes, I think I've told you about these before, but we do have 463 West Street coming back to you because we didn't get an appropriate number of planning board members to vote on the special permit for 463 West Street to extinguish previous special permits. So we have to bring that back to you. And then we have another special permit at 51 Spalding Street, which is already a 2-family house. And one of the units has some lodgers, and they need to clarify their parking issues and also clarify the fact that they have lodgers in this 2-family house. So Nate is most conversant about this project. If you have questions about that, you could ask him Otherwise, you'll be seeing this, I think, on the 7th of September.
I don't recall 463 West Street. Did I miss that hearing?
That's the one that was already approved. It was Ron Laverdier, the retaining wall in back of the building.
Oh, okay.
But there was a special permit to extinguish the two ZBA permits from the 80s. And the hearing was continued, and when it was continued, there was only 4 voting members, and there needs to be 5 for a special permit, so
Okay.
it has to come back.
I think, okay, I must have missed that. Okay.
Okay, all right, so I guess moving on, committee and liaison reports. PVPC, we don't have anyone to represent that. CPAC, Andrew is absent. Design Review Board, Tom is absent. Janet, how about the Solar Bylaw Working Group?
We had another productive meeting. Chris Brestrup gave an excellent overview of land use and mapping in Amherst, which you can't get enough of because you always look at it and try to learn new stuff. So she's kind of giving the board the literal lay of the land in Amherst. And then we had a long presentation by another member about the mass decarbonization roadmap, and then the very, very recent plan for how to get there. And so it takes recommendations of the roadmap and it puts together a plan of, like, you know, what sources of energy, of renewable energy the state will be looking at. And then also kind of a, Martha Hanner pointed out, there's a new emphasis on, natural lands as carbon sinks, because even if we went to net zero today, we're still in trouble. And so we need to increase our capacity of the natural, like farmland, forest lands, and wetlands to absorb carbon dioxide. And so there's a new emphasis on that in the plan. But it was really thorough, and it's actually a really excellent plan. The problem with all these documents, they're like 150 pages, and but they really go deep and they're interesting. And so that's it.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Nate.
Yeah, I just want to say that the CPA, in Andrew's absence, the CPA committee has put its schedule on their webpage. And so proposals open September 1st and they're due by the end of September. So, the next round of CPA proposals is, starting soon, and the committee will meet in November to start reviewing those. So, just for everyone watching or who will watch that, the process is starting a little earlier this year, and the window to submit is the month of September.
Okay, great. And Chris, anything you want to say about CRC?
The next CRC meeting, am I muted or not? No.
No, you're good.
The next CRC meeting is on the 25th of August, and they're going to be discussing rental registration. And then the CRC meeting after that, and this is some good news. I should have told you this under new business. We finally received our letter of final determination from FEMA with regard to our flood maps. So CRC is holding a continued public hearing on the flood maps on September 8th, and the planning board will hold its continued public hearing on the flood maps on September 7th. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to wrap it all up on September 7th, but at least it'll be coming back to you in a real form that we can act on if we choose to.
All right. And Nate, is your hand up again? No, okay. Okay, then we're on to the report of the chair, and I have no report other than to say this may be my last meeting as chair, because I think we do elections next time, right, Chris?
Elections next time, that's right.
That's right. So all, I guess, do we want to just have people show up at the meeting and with some, if you're interested in a position or representing the board on a committee, show up and, be ready to say you're interested and would like to be appointed or elected to that position.
I think that's a good idea. And also, if you have ideas about who you want to nominate for different positions. So obviously Doug Marshall is our chair, and I strongly support Doug Marshall as chair, but that is not up to me because I don't get to vote. Tom Long is our vice chair. And I'm trying to think who is the clerk. Maria was the clerk,
Maria was the clerk,
and I don't think we have a clerk now.
right? So we
So-
need and for you new members, the clerk really doesn't take minutes or do normal clerk things because we have the expertise of Chris and Pam. And so the clerk is really, is the clerk third in line if the chair and the vice chair are both absent from a meeting?
That's right, yes, and the clerk could chair a meeting. in that-
Okay, so that's the
event.
predominant role of the clerk
Yep.
at this point.
So I wanted to make mention of the fact that Jack Jemsick is the alternate PVPC representative, and he is going to continue as the executive committee representative for the PVPC, but that leaves open the principal role of commissioner with PVPC. So people should be thinking about volunteering for that if that is of interest to them.
And you had sent us an email that had some information about how often they meet and,
Yes.
you know, kind of what level of commitment that is.
So if you want me to send that again, do.
I think that would be great if you would.
Yeah,
You know, maybe 10 days before our next meeting, or, you know, I guess our next meetings, it feels like our next meeting is not just in 14 days, it's maybe 3 weeks from now.
3
So,
weeks, yeah.
so maybe send it a week before the next meeting.
Okay.
And
And-
my vague recollection from our last meeting was that you had talked about PVPC with Bruce and he was open to doing that.
Bruce is open to doing it. Yep.
And I see he confirmed with his thumb. Okay. All right, so I had no report. Chris?
I have
did
no
you-
report other than to say that we are not going to have a meeting on August 31st. We
Okay,
don't have any business to
so,
conduct.
so
that night,
everybody
so
have a good Labor Day.
That's right.
thank you. Thanks.
And the time is 9:51 and I think we can adjourn. Thank you all for your time and your service to the town.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Goodbye.
Okay, good night.